And with that note, as tangents being welcome, we are starting up once again. We're already
internet issues.
We're like an hour late plus, and we're not going live because internet's completely messed up. Tried restarting, all this kind of stuff. Sure. But anyways, welcome to Portal Mountain Development Meeting number 52. We've got Dustin here with us. We've got the usual Zhenya and I, Brian. And we have just been going on complete rants, talking the shit over each other.
I think it's that little bit of medicine I took earlier. It's kind of kicking.
Yeah, it may have that effect.
Yeah, it does.
So, what we're going to try to do right now, just for a second, is slow down for just a minute here and kind of recap what we were trying to do. Before we started the meeting, we were on our drive here talking about the alpha and the omega of the book that we're writing, which is like, so the omega being guild organization. How do you organize people? What does it look like? How does it work? We're talking about like the pantheon of archetypes here, this kind of stuff, these different roles you can take up, of the different offices to create actual existing structures.
Right. Reflective structures.
And so that's where I wanted the book to end up, in that we're actually, okay, now here's organization. Where does it begin? It's like, how do you get into the zeitgeist and stuff, like this bad feeling that we're all having. We can all feel like in every interaction we have, it feels empty and hollow, and something's just wrong, and everything keeps going all fucked up, and war and all this kind of stuff. That's the zeitgeist we all feel, so we need to bring that into this whole, the arc of the book. So that's kind of something I wanted to get into. Another thing we've been speaking a lot about is kind of moral outrage, and in particular like classism, class warfare, like eat the rich, these kind of ideas. And it's like, it doesn't really help anything to take a category of people and demonize them. Sure. Because what does it do? You're going to lynch people and hang them up on, to get the rope,
that's
to
the outcome,
individuals. Yeah. But what we're missing in that is that all of us are pathologized like this kind of ADD, a problem where we're just scraping it and clawing after rewards and avoiding punishments, right? Mm-hmm. So the so-called elite are in the same boat, where it's like they themselves are just in this trap of going after dopamine hits. Like this is what rewards me. This is what rewards me.
Yeah, that doesn't change.
And they on the other hand, the higher you go up, the more bad the punishments become. If like, look at Hollywood. If you try going out of the corral, you're fucked right away in like 10 different ways, right? So it doesn't help to create this kind of like, it's them, it's this group of people, it's that group of people doing things, because all you do is, on the street level, you cause people to try identify some poor fucking individual and bash them, lynch them, kill them.
And that bleeds into,
does nothing.
And that bleeds into like identifying problems within the system itself. What tends to happen is that if a problem is identified, a systemic problem is identified, it's immediately recuperated, if you will, by the system, by taking a group of people as a basis for blame for that problem.
Right, typical scapegoat.
And
this is what we're seeing big time with all that the Kanye stuff.
Oh,
like the Jews and all this, like
Jewish media.
This is a perfect example. That's a continuation of the system. That does not help it. That's actually an emergence of the problem itself.
Right. Instead of calling out the individuals, you're going to be group identifying people.
Or sure, calling out individuals, but even better than that, systemically, what is the meme, the cultural shit that's hijacked the brain of the individual?
Right.
Because that's the systemic thing. It's not this person, get that person made that decision. Doesn't matter. All should be forgiven, right? Essentially, it's a mind virus is jumping from, as soon as you're born, you're indoctrinated into it, right?
Right. Yes. I think we need to just, instead of grouping people, just look at their individual value. Right?
Another way.
Everybody's got their own individual value. Everybody's got something to contribute.
Yeah.
Right? They're their own person. Aside from this tribalism.
So one way of putting what we're saying is that you can't resolve issues within the social operating system in which we all operate by eliminating specific neurological operating systems out of the mix. That is
right. Targeting certain people.
Targeting certain individuals, in a sense, killing them or removing them from their ability to participate in the vast majority of the social interaction. So eliminating neurological operating systems out of the mix does not actually resolve what's happening to that mix.
Right.
It's
It's always
really our point.
It always comes down to an education problem, really, because it's like mimetic mind viruses, and we have to go back to the root of civilization.
And you don't mean
the root,
formal, right?
The root of capitalism.
You don't mean formal education, right?
No, of course
you
not.
mean the capacity to map what's happening to an expression that reflects it.
Yeah, I mean coming back into presence and testing your models. That's what education is.
But the ability to read and write is even just the more basic thing, because that was used as control as well. Way back when, don't teach your servants
this is technology
and your slaves how to
to me.
read and write,
So
because then you can control.
Education could be like a tool, right? Reading is a tool that can be used in education for sure. But I don't think education begins with writing or reading in particular, because that's more a continuation of what we already do as a human species compared to other animals. To qualify that, what I mean, most other animals, not all, most other animals, the way they behave, right, is almost, you could say it's hardwired into their neurological makeup. Humans are a bit different in that they delay that, and instead of hardwiring that stuff into their mind before being human, we internalize it conceptually, all of our activities, so we delay it, we learn about it, and we have a representation of all of these things in another layer, so to speak, a cognitive layer that drives most of our behaviors, which is why
we're not just going off instincts,
right? Which is why human behavior is actually far more varied across cultures than, say, the other apes. So with other apes, like say chimps, they're more violent on the male side, for example, and all of those kinds of things. And all chimps share that trait.
Right.
And then you have gorillas that have harems and all of that, and all gorillas really share that trait. Humans, on the other hand, we don't have that built in. We assimilate one of those systems through learning and then exercise that, and that's how we get different cultures, where some cultures are more more female dominated, some more male dominated, some mixed, some like you have in human culture you get every variant that you see. Of course.
In the so hold on. What you're pointing to at is how vulnerable, in a way. So human mind and how we work is much more powerful than the rest of the animal kingdom, in that we can be given arbitrary code, completely fucking arbitrary. It can have nothing to do with anything. The instincts don't encroach on that. The responsibility to that, though, is to take this model, whatever we've learned, and through presence act it out and see if it works or not. Right? That's the responsibility of that power, because we can have anything shoved into our head.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the way
we're more evolved for how we deal with things as well.
Right.
Right. It's not just based off of your emotions and your.
It's
Well,
yeah.
We know whenever you jump into overreact to something, or you go off of your instincts opposed to thinking it through. We have that ability, whereas primates.
Yeah.
They don't.
Like almost like we can choose which way to go.
So another component to it, so kind of like an evidence to what I'm just saying, is that pre-civilization, before that pivoting point where things got written down, pre-civilization mythology tended to evolve with the people that used it, right? So if part of the mythology stopped working for them, it will change to something that would work for them, right? So if a situation, say they're switching from, say, hunt and gather into an agricultural lifestyle because some field opened up after the ice age or something like that, right? All the stories with regards to going to the forest become less meaningful, but all the stories with regarding to tending to the fields become much more meaningful. And so you
Right.
have an adaptation of the previous archetypes, if you will, in their old mythologies, taking on new roles, different configurations, and different relationships to accommodate what the people are experiencing. So you have this period of time where mythology is in a complete flux, following the people,
So the
evolving with them.
question I have then is how do you have this flux? How does your culture evolve through time? And is that still happening right now, really?
Well, in the face of the written word, that becomes much more difficult.
Right. Yeah, that's to my point. With oral tradition, you're always having contact directly with other people. You're telling stories. Stories get picked up by your peers who like your story.
Can I finish
and it
my
becomes...
arc? Just,
Sure.
just so I don't feel like I'm over talking anybody.
Okay.
So I started all of this as saying that writing and reading is a continuation of this internalization of activity. So instead of just being written in the mind, our mind learns new things and then it exercises them. Well, this download, upload, writing things down in your brain and then writing them back out as activity.
It's almost like there's a separation.
Is the same. Is continued onto other media after the fact. So we developed language to do that. Then we developed to represent our thoughts, right? So first we developed thoughts, complex thoughts. Then we developed the language to express those thoughts. Then we developed ways to change the environment to represent those same thoughts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Oh,
Now, to me, it sounds like you're
so reading
you're
and writing is a
saying
continuation of that.
it sounds like you're saying there's a bit of a separation in that our mapping modeling ability is kind of like what do you call this? It's like a scenario. The ability to have it to run a scenario in your mind. I don't think animals really have that.
They do, but it's what I would think. Like, this is kind of me talking out of my ass, but what I would think is that it's a kind of prefabricated.
Yeah.
It takes prefabricated
No.
pathways.
I mean language mediated scenario. In the case of the animal, it's a network, a neural network emergence of things, and you almost come to a decision at a snap. You don't have to process it.
The way I think about it is that your mind is a representation of your body. So there is going to be a language in the mind already to deal with your body to begin with, right? The rest of the story, where the human picks up the baton, if you will, apart from the other animals, is that it creates another representation of that representation again, right? A more complicated one, a more convoluted one. But to do that, it takes more time, and it takes experiential.
I think it's like realizing potential. That's what it is.
So what I'm saying is that where most animals are so many layers deep into representing their body, the human is taking a different step and is representing those representation and working from the representations of representations.
Hold on.
To do its thing. So it's a secondary step.
Isn't
and
that...
writing is like another step of the same idea of you take that representation externalized, downloaded, and do that thing. So it's like your brain has a database in it of just shit it's writing down that is about the animal itself. That's what the animals don't do.
That's the potential. What I'm talking about.
That's what the animals
you can
don't do.
recognize the way certain situations can play out in your mind based off of experiences you've been through.
Yeah.
So
a secondary representational layer is really what.
But that's the difference, right?
What makes the human a human.
Potential.
Right. Now, isn't this something like the same as how a crow can look in the mirror and see itself? Like that there's something extra that certain animals can do a little bit. And dolphins, I bet, the same.
Yeah.
They can do this at a rudimentary level where it's like, oh, I'm looking at myself in the mirror.
Yeah, absolutely. This ability is not unique to humans. This is why I'm saying some. It's just a very accentuated version of what all of the other animals are doing. Because the mind will also have to have a representation of itself controlling the body to some extent. whether you have words and language to put that into a sentence inside that same mind is a different question, right?
It's like
it
introspective,
feels
kind of.
instinctual. It does not, like, moving your arm does not feel like you need to word it, right? Like, you just do it, right?
But then to talk about the moving of the arm, that's what you're saying is like a kind of something on top of.
Well, animals don't do, say, martial arts. Martial art was a choreographed movement. Where is the representation of that choreography existing?
But
right?
we
That-
recognize that we're operating this machine, being our bodies. Right?
Hopeful,
So you
ideally.
can- well, but you can
That's
kind
half
of
the
step
battle.
outside of that, right, and then see, okay,
That's the stepping outside is already to recognize that we are this. I'm good. We are this kind of machine.
I'm good.
To recognize and model it, that's already the stepping outside
Right.
of, and kind of mastery or what.
and then seeing
So-
recognizing
And then,
potential
and then to
for
have a
situations
self-consistent
that can happen.
language sit on top of that as a representative of all of these things to begin with. That's what's uniquely human. It's
Right.
not that animals don't have language, it's that our language is consistent, our language is repeatable, right? Like, and evolvable on its own. It's like it's taking that same basis but like took it to a whole fucking new level.
right, because
They
animals
still do it.
communicate amongst
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah, they
right?
still do it, but they don't know what that they're doing it. Like, they're not thinking to themselves, I'm talking to Bob.
right.
Even dolphins who have names for each other probably don't say to themselves the sentence, I'm going to talk to Bob now.
Okay, hold on. Wait a
Maybe
minute.
they
Wait a
do,
minute.
though.
Wait a minute. Wait a
No,
minute.
they
Wait
have
a
that
minute.
thought, but
Hold
not
on.
in a language.
Hold on. Hold on.
It's a,
Hold on.
just like you can make a decision
hold
without
on, hold on.
speaking it to
Wait.
yourself.
Sorry.
Moving it on.
Sorry, wait. That ability is prerequisite for, I think, language itself. Expression of language, and especially if you think written language. That's description of things. You can never have a description of things
Well,
in it
written
from an
thought
animal,
is it.
from an animal's mindset. It never comes from. The
Because
animal
it-
is never describing. They are in it. They are it.
Right.
Right?
They're reacting.
See, they can't speak it. They can't write it.
And
They can make noises that are part of the environment, but they
We only
can't say,
know
"Oh,
this-
hey, this is a pretty cool noise. Hey, Bob, listen to this." Roof.
we only know,
The
and we-
animal cannot do that.
We can only really claim this if we also claim that we also are doing this, but we're also doing something on top of that. Right? Like, the reason we don't notice it as much for us is because we're so quick to quantify it.
So you
in
just point at the
language.
sentient machine.
Yeah. So we're instinctually quantifying it, that we're not even realizing that we're doing the exact same thing, including that quantification, which is part of our instinctual repertoire.
Right.
So even people who would talk about this stuff may not realize the sentient machine itself, which is to deeply model and map that process, the neurochemical process that's actually going on to do those things.
Right. Making these realizations, I guess.
And it's not just making the
All the
realization, but
mappings.
making sure that every single word you utter comes from that realization after the fact. It's not just in here, but it's just to really assimilate that notion of reality and be in that reality as well.
And to,
That's the
to
enlightenment.
realize that
That's the
I'm
enlightenment.
mapping and
Yeah.
modeling, and you have a different map and model. So when I say words, I have to say them in a specific way that I believe that your map and model will interpret.
Sure.
Sentient machine does
Yeah,
that.
and
In
we
the
touched on
sense that we're
before,
speaking the
yeah.
same language, literally.
Yeah.
It's a give and take sensing kind of thing, vibing, jamming.
And it comes back to,
Right.
again, why we created a language on top of English. It's like creating that layer. It's admittance that there is a higher layer,
Yeah.
and we need something to sit on top of English to qualify a bunch of words so that they're interpreted just the right way when speaking English. Because English doesn't
there's,
provide.
Because there's
English
so many
doesn't
ways
provide it.
you can say the same thing but word it differently.
That's what I'm saying.
Right?
English does not provide it, but this model speak is supposed to cover that area and say, to do that, you need to interpret these terms, like, not this way, but not like a dictionary. But the problem is, again, qualification versus quantification. Dictionaries quantify. So what we're needing to do is create a bunch of, say, mirrors, if you will, on the upper layer that point to specific things and say, okay, this is talking about that, this is talking about that. And you can't say why, because that layer it can't explain it. English can't explain why love is this or justice is that, or, you know what I mean?
Sure.
So
certain things you can't.
You need to qualify the language. After you've quantified everything using language, you need to qualify that language after the fact to complete the picture to be sentient of itself.
Because love to me might mean something different to you.
Right. Because if you don't do that part, you got robots.
Sure.
Or, as I like to call them, animated corpses.
Well, an AI
We're
is never
animated,
going to be
we're
able
animated,
to...
but we're not living. We're executing other programs. That's again, that's where really the point of why we're doing this is like, nobody finds meaning in that. Everybody's saying, at least, that they're searching for meaning. Well, that meaning only will ever come if you start the qualification later. And yeah, I am kind of claiming that that's the case. Whether you believe me or not is not, I'm not trying to prove it, right? But what I'm suggesting is that if you think about it and try it, maybe you'll see it for yourself.
Well, that's what a charlatan would say.
And a charlatan would also want your subscription to his daily newspaper.
Sure.
And what I would say is then, if that's the case, then I didn't prove shit to you. You proved it to yourself, and and with that proof, I don't need again to entice you into doing anything, because you come to the same conclusion as me. So you just do the same things or similar things in different ways. But the point is that we're now both members,
Right.
and we both see it. So why would I coerce you to do anything? What would be the point? There's no. That's where the charlatan fails in most cases, in that they need you in their club, right? They need your support and all of that shit.
Yeah.
Because it's not about the actual realization; it's about keeping the system going.
Right. Maintaining power.
In this case, everything I set out to potentially convince you of, I did, which was nothing more than to express the way I experience things, in a sense. If that resonates with you, what the fuck do I need to kind of convince you of?
Right.
I don't have anything to prove. Right? So yeah, there's a claim, but it's not the kind of claim that like you need an essay for. Again, it's a qualitative thing. You either see it or you don't.
Well, we know you're secretly trying to get him into the guild.
That's just the nature of everything I say.
No, I'm just kidding. Dustin is a member of the guild. That I'm quite certain of.
I
Maybe
talk
you guys
the way
are
I
trying
do.
to get into my guild.
You're already a member.
Trying to
Yeah.
qualify yourself.
Trying to weasel
for
our
my
way
guild.
in.
Yeah. But do we see it as a different thing? Because the guild is the guild is the guild is the guild.
Right. Sure.
Like with all of its delineations, divisions, and whatever, like we have an immunity guild as a method of of representing you're an organism in an environment.
Right.
So immunity speaks to what happens when damage happens, and what do you do to prevent damage from happening.
Right.
It's just makes sense. Survival, right? Like 101 survival.
Adaptation.
We call it immunity. So just because, say, somebody's in the immunity guild, does that mean they're not getting educated in the education guild? Because I don't know. I don't know about you, but it takes education to know what immunity is.
Right.
It takes education
Yeah.
to know what education is.
Sure.
So that's how they. Again, we're seeing the
it's all
stacking.
subjective though too, right?
What I'm saying is that there is a stacking going on in one sense, but it's all the same thing in another. It's all flat.
Yeah.
Right? Like, yes, stuff builds on top of each other,
Yeah.
but it doesn't change.
So
Like,
this is the
molecules-
holonic model.
molecules built from atoms, but it don't prevent atoms from existing. They're
always gonna be there.
still atoms.
Yeah.
I think this comes
The
up
building
front
blocks.
for the book. This comes up front, like one of the upfront things. I think it has to be pointed at that our current models, the way we think, linear thinking, it always ends up in these hierarchies of like
Authority.
identity,
And
authority,
authority.
identity based. So your identity is your authority in the hierarchy, and it's static. That way of thinking about
There are a number.
organization is very limited. It can't move. Nothing moves. You're all stuck, and you get promoted or you get demoted, right? But it's all stuck. The point of holonic modeling is like nature and all these layers that like atoms come together to make molecules. You're not limiting and saying, "Oh, I am God. I say this is how the organization is," right? I say that this molecule is made of this atom and that one, da 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 da. Meanwhile, nature itself has that and a million other things that could happen and a million other factors, infinite number of factors. And we're just picking out what the metastability is and saying that is true and then trying to manipulate things as if we're God, right?
I'm like laughing.
The holonic
I'm laughing
model
at that
allows
because
you
it's so
to
funny.
holonic model allows you to talk about things in a fuzzy way. And you're saying that this structure, instead of like triangles and pyramids and all that, you're just saying everything is what it is. Anything that I ever talk about, it is a holon, and they relate in different ways. And sometimes you could say that this comes together to build something bigger, and so that this is more significant, this is more fundamental. But it
No, more important.
it not more important, and it also leaves open the possibility at every point, even if something emerged in the more significant layer, that it itself is combining to take care of the fundamentals that it came from. Right?
Can I
You're
just-
not excluding any of that. So this is a
can I
way of
qualify
a
something?
non-exclusive modeling, whereas typical linear modeling that we use for today's society and
I just
organization
want to
is
qualify
limited.
two of the terms that we
You're
used.
cutting out most of the potential. Remember, Dustin, you were saying about potential and what's your
Yeah.
potential? We're cutting most of that out.
Right.
Most of it. Like, that's what we're looking at here. If we can crack this nut for organization of people,
Right.
like, it's a fucking explosion. There's so much
But people have
potential there.
unlimited potential too.
Well, that's
It's-
what we're
it's-
saying, really.
We're just we're stuck in these linear type of models for how we organize.
Yeah, it redirects the potential into
That's this
oblivion,
planet.
basically.
That's what we're doing.
I just wanted to qualify. We said a bunch of times there's two layers: significant and fundamental. So the fundamental is below, the significant is above in the model. So it's kind of like, I just want to make sure that
This is that layer
it's,
stacking
It's
idea.
not. I just don't want to I just want to make sure nothing is lost in translation. When you say a word, right, you encode it into a sound and transmit it, or you write it down and transmit it, right? That's the fundamental layer. The reason it's fundamental is because it's fundamental to the transfer, right? Like you can't, you have to. It's fundamental to the entire structure in the sense that it has to go through it. So that makes it important on its own right. The secondary thing is significant. The point of writing down a word isn't for it to be on the paper, right? It's for the word is only significant when you read it in the upper layers of your mind that exist above that.
It's past saying it out loud.
Right.
And then that makes it more complicated.
There's a
because
translation going on, and it's been used. It has a
it's third
causative.
layer, fourth layer.
It has a
maybe.
causative effect. Yeah, we're condensing.
It's more
it to,
powerful
We're
media.
condensing it to
Yeah.
two so that it's easy to picture. But yeah, you can totally like separate many different layers.
Where the
between
thought
my vocal
starts
cords.
to creating,
Between my
coherent
vocal
thought.
cords to the vibrations of the molecules themselves.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
Like,
you
there's
can
so
break
many.
down-
Yeah, you
of
have to
course.
filter out to, by a coherent thought, you mean like, okay, this is a feeling and emotion, but now to be expressed, you're filtering it through kind of a whole bunch
Right.
of processes.
That's
So
like your initial.
That's
layer.
where it's significant because that's where that has a causal effect.
Right.
And that's where it's fundamental because there is no significant without attaching itself to some fundamental layers below it, right? It only works when you have the stacking.
Based off experience, I think too, right?
So
Gotta have something
yeah.
to do with it.
So two things that we can determine out of
Experience,
this.
perception, I guess.
Right. So two things we can determine out of this is that why there's a horizon for one. Going down, no problem. Going up could be a potential problem, and why there needs to be a reflection of in the upper layer of the layers below. So you need to understand that you're using air to communicate with another person.
Sure.
And you need to understand that this is another person, and you need to understand that they have a stack of themselves going on, and you know what I mean? Like
So almost like
all
empathy
these,
to know where these ideas are coming from.
which lead to the aforementioned capacity to behave in quote unquote
Empathy is a
love,
good word
or-
here, I think.
Yeah, empathy is that's the empathy. I usually describe it as the one and only narrative that we all share, and that's this model that I'm talking about, in
Right.
which there's all these stacking and layers and what.
Because we've all been through these
because we're all that.
experiences.
And no matter what words come out of your mouth, no matter what words come out of my mouth, it's only that we're really only ever
been
talking
established,
about that, right?
Right.
So this is the only narrative there is, and through that being the only narrative, if
What,
you understand
empathy?
it that way, yeah.
Okay.
If
yeah,
you
yeah.
understand it that way, and I understand it that way, that's the only thing to empathize with.
Right.
Everything else is what we call an artifact, artificial, which is it's
Yeah,
good,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
bad,
yeah,
it's,
yeah. So
it's good, it's
so
bad,
wait,
it's whatever.
So you're pointing at the actual inner experience as empathizing with, right?
Yeah.
The ongoing
What real
narratives,
empathy is, the
the
quality
ongoing
of
stories that we
empathy.
all have in our head that we're creating as we go.
The quality of empathy is just this recognition of this one narrative that is the same narrative of you in a
Right.
different language, obviously, not with the same words.
Right.
Nobody's saying that. We're creating a language to capture it, sure.
Right, right. And this is the membership thing again too. This is we just come full circle with the what is membership discussion.
Right.
It's that recognition of this conversation of empathy,
So quality.
and that we really are kind of all the same sharing.
Well, it's a realization where we've been through similar experiences, and then we're in this kind of together, right?
Mhm.
It's like
Yeah.
a connection.
And
That's
that's
the
the
only
way
way
I
we
feel
would have
like
come to
that.
this
So-
point. Yes.
Yeah.
So here we arrive at another word that has been recuperated by the system to mean some variety of shit. Like empathy, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's like stepping into somebody else's shoes.
Sure.
What I'm saying is to make empathy a meaningful word for yourself, map it to what we just said, to this a realization of the stack, to be it being the narrative we all actually share, and move and the movement through it with love.
Right.
That's real empathy. That's meaningful in experience. Everything else that is discussed as empathy is what we call an artifact. And an artifact is because there's still shit gets produced besides the point. Obviously, nobody's denying that either. What we're saying is that the disposition shouldn't to artifacts, all the way down to like your personal life story even, should be treated sympathetically, not empathetically. And the reason for that is that because it's the narrative
He's
is still
talking
the
about-
same, but this, to be sympathetic is to recognize the that something is happening, but not identify with it.
So there's a
That could
fine.
be a projection too. Though.
Hold on,
You
there's
don't
a-
wanna conflate
I
the
wanted
two,
I wanted
right?
to make sure that you understand.
So we're talking
To
about
my own life story.
Hold on, Jen.
I
hold-
should not identify with my own life story like that deep.
That's
I'm not
a
talking.
projection,
I'm
that's
not.
what
I'm
I'm
not
saying.
saying.
That's.
I'm not sure I know.
I
what
don't
you
think
mean.
projection is the right word, but yeah, you're right. Even your own past, I
Yeah.
shouldn't be dwelling over. Oh, this happened, that happened. And here's the difference between empathy and sympathy. In this is that the empathy is our narrative, ongoing, the actual being, living and
In a
existing,
complete relation.
and the sympathy is what that looks like.
The,
Mic
the,
drop.
like the
I don't-
stuff
I don't know,
beside.
Mic drop, because we've all made mistakes. It's all looked bad for us, and that's not who we are. That's not in the moment. That's not our essence of what's going on here.
Right.
What it looks like is a completely fucking different thing. Mic drop.
I think the sympathy
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
is the projection though, because you're going
What do
through
you mean
your
by
own
project-
mind.
Yeah,
how
I didn't get
how
the
you-
projection word here. How that's.
What do you mean by
Okay, so basically, your empathy. So you.
Oh yeah,
you've
yeah.
been
It's,
through this-
sympathy is attached to projection.
Yeah.
Because you're just
You're imagining
you're saying,
how
oh, that
you would
looks-
feel
that
in
looks
that
bad.
situation, so you're assuming that this
Yeah.
person's going to feel the exact same way reacting
Yeah,
to that
and
situation.
we're saying it's not meaning.
right. So,
But it's
it's
always
not
on
meaningful
the what you saw them do. It's not
When
it's
the-
not a connection of wow, I'm connecting with this being. It's a judgment, right? Correct.
Right.
Yes.
oh, so
that's
I
what-
felt this way, so this person must feel that way. So I'm
based
gonna
on what they
project
look like.
That is-
my feelings. Oh, this person must be, against the wall.
so-
Yes,
so-
yes,
so-
yes.
so-
That's
so
a
here.
sympathetic apprehension because you're not being like I am
Hold
part
on,
of that.
Hold on. There's.
We're part of
I want to point something
sharing
out.
the same
I wanna
story.
point something out that's
Dustin
very
is
important.
he's on track though,
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely.
so I just wanted to point that out.
What I'm saying is, what I would like to add, sorry, is that there is a discrepancy that goes on when you do that. if you project sympathetically something, but then treat it empathetically as the narrative instead of the one that we're talking about, that is the meaningful empathy. If you
Right.
make that mistake, what will happen is that you now equated yourself with that person. That
Right.
person didn't
False empathy.
Didn't say they wanted your help.
no. They didn't meet the expectation of you. Like if you were them, you'd do something different. They don't meet that expectation.
Right.
You've empathized with them in this incorrect narrative,
Right.
not the one that we're saying about that would bring meaning. So now you've made that error.
Yeah. It's
What
false
happens
empathy.
is that you become angry with yourself because you've seen yourself do something you don't want to do,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And then that immediately that
painful.
empathetic treatment of that person actually does not result in an expression of any kind of empathy. It results in a kind of punishment or
Self-hatred.
reward interaction at that point, because you're wrong, I'm right. There's an above and a below calculation going on,
Right.
and you're feeding
At that point,
story.
it's kind of like we have
And
to
so-
be punished now.
And so an artifact happened to which you should have sympathy, but you've taken it empathetically. And
Right.
that mismatch is what the system
this
is
is a
using all
huge
the time.
But
factor.
is it a virtue though, or is that?
No, it's not a good thing to do. This is a huge factor in codependency
Yeah.
as well.
One
with
is-
relationships.
That's where I'm going with that.
One-
I think
one-
a lot of
you-
it's
one
like
is
getting-
just
you
like
get-
people
you-
are just projecting.
You take it so personally, and it's like you're getting shook up by them, their behavior, and they get shook up by your behavior, and it's
Yeah.
just a
And then-
fucking mess.
But on the other side of this coin, you get one narrative, stable, never changing.
This is a true
eternal-
empathy.
Eternal, if you will, not in the sense that nothing's changing, but eternal in the sense that whatever is changing, it's that it's still the same narrative. We're still all stacks. We're still
So-
all going through the layers. We're still all nothing is about that is changing.
Right.
That everything else is an outflow of that. So there's only one narrative, and you never move off that point. You don't need to.
You get stuck in that bubble.
You don't. It's not being stuck because you're everywhere at once. Because you're not
Maybe.
right. The narratives still happen. Their
it's-
artifacts are still all around you.
It's just
But,
in
but
in
they
the
don't
moment.
shift the narrative from the narrative.
So the problem is getting bent out of shape over everything happening around you, and that's a codependent relationship, all that kind of stuff.
And I'm
With a
describing
true,
not
when
doing
you
that.
have a true empathy disposition with the people around you,
It doesn't
you
move.
doesn't matter what they do or what happens. It's like pure love,
Right.
right? And not in the way of like you're saying projecting yourself onto the other. That's the false empathy, right?
Right.
And that's what keeps. That's why when they do something, you get rumbled up, even though you think, "Oh, we're a family," or whatever. We're best
it will be
friends.
through seeing membership, if you will. It's through seeing their membership, like you're seeing
Right? Yeah,
your,
we're talking.
like you're
yeah,
seeing your
so,
own.
I was just
Right.
talking about false empathy there for a sec, but
Yeah.
That's-
yeah, really good. Good
It's
topic.
like using the same things that we already do, just slightly, like
and
more real. if
we
you
do
will.
need a language
Without-
for
without-
this.
Without all the bullshit that usually gets tagged onto it for branding purposes and virtue signaling, which is branding again.
Right. But people using that empathy to feel better about themselves because
Well,
the way they see it, they're like the hero in the picture.
we're
Meanwhile,
we're kind of the
maybe
new
they're
guys on the
not,
block
right?
that are saying, hey, why don't you use the word empathy this way and the word sympathy that way?
Right.
None of them know that yet, right? Like we're not like so when people are doing that, they have no idea what the fuck we're thinking it to begin with. So it's a matter of ignorance as well.
Right.
So
and
it's-
it's,
it's
part
not
of
like
the
they
ego
know.
machine too,
It's not
because
like-
you're.
It's not
you're
like they
doing it
know
to-
that what they're doing is not empathy, because who the fuck taught them to look at empathy this way
Here's an
before?
interesting
Nobody.
thing
Right.
about appropriation of words that we do a lot. We're not just creating our model, the model, whatever. We're changing the English language because it's going to be better when people learn how to fucking use these words properly.
Well, meaningfully, it's the point
Right?
is to inject
And you
the
talk
meaning.
about, like we were talking about Buddhist concepts earlier, that need to be kind of translated into modern vernacular, however you want to say.
Yeah, it's like translating Latin into
Um,
English.
Yeah, like that's not, it's not, that's what this is. It's not being done anywhere else very effectively that I know of. And I think everybody kind of goes through a bit of this process to create their own model to
I think a lot of people
to
get
learn.
stuck with occult, and their language capacity to evolve dies there. Like as soon as you like sign yourself up for one of these clubs, if you will, that speak their own esoteric language.
Yeah, that's
it.
which is
Like,
exhausting.
it goes
Yeah.
down. This is where it all goes down to die, because nobody else is speaking any of that language. What I want to do is speak English,
Sure.
but use words that have meaning instead of fucking fluff.
Yeah, that's a great point. And not so exhausting either. You don't have to go through the jump these hurdles. You just have to realize that there are better ways to use certain words. It's like it means what you think it meant, but it's just a little bit, different.
Yeah.
Right. And Buddhism, like talking about empathy and sympathy and all this kind of stuff, obviously important, right? We even got into like this idea of codependency in relationships and like how fucked up relationships can happen. Obviously, people in contemporary modern times know that shit is fucking whacked.
It affects them negatively all the time.
This is a huge negative part of many people's environments and just our relationships and all this alienation. All of that, Buddhism would have its own language to describe in its own esoteric ways, which would be fucking exhausting to go read these things, right? But that's what kind of we've done.
Well, you gotta take into account things like Buddhism comes from a tradition of 400 years of oral recitation. So to record,
Right, we don't need that anymore.
to record
Ain't nobody
the
got
teaching
time
itself,
for that.
people memorized poems. Like that's how they would make sure that
Well,
So that-
that's how they would make sure that the same poem is transmitted over and
So
over and
that
over again
even
by
if
making it into a specific
even if,
poem.
let's say, the
Codifying it.
Buddha dies, or the high priest dies, and the temple only has laymen, i.e., let's say called participant membership, they can still recite and keep going until somebody fucking snaps right back into it. Before you know it, you've got membership and the guild is flourishing again.
But they're on kind of a never-ending quest of enlightenment.
That should probably never
do you
happen, like-
do you
people are
ever
born
truly
out,
become
people are born all the
enlightened, though?
time. People are born all the time, right? So it's not like a static field to play with. You've got more minds and more minds and more minds emerging.
Right.
The idea is like much like the body gets to grow up to be an adult, the mind should also grow up into this more unified adult-like, if you will,
maturity.
Right.
system. It is
That's-
still a system.
that's
The
what we
system's
call-
not a bad word.
we
the
call
problem
that
with,
membership.
The problem with the system is that it has no concept of itself. And having no concept of itself, it
It
basically shoots itself in the foot every single time it pulls the trigger.
And through our education system, we're pushed into participation. This running this system that we're not even a part of, really. We're just get your
Right.
job,
We're guests in
make
it.
You're
money.
molded into a number
We're
of
not
the
even-
machine.
This store will give you food.
We're
that
not
will
even
give you gas.
we're not even participants, because one of the defining factors of a participant is they recognize the goodness in something
No,
in what
well,
they're participating in. And most people, I would say, don't, because they're just ground to the fucking ground. The middle class would probably be more of the participant stuff, but they're very
interesting.
those
Okay,
are,
okay,
those are
okay,
smaller
wait.
pockets
Yo,
of people.
We're talking about actually what I meant to say instead of participant. There would be an equivalent on the hostility end of the spectrum.
The worker.
The spectrum of hostility, right? Instead of coherence, hostility. This would be people having a system to trap you into it. Well, because you do participate in this education, this system. You work, you get money,
Matrix.
and you do stuff, right? But it's not the good.
No, it's actually not the bad. We use that metaphor.
It's not on the side of
use that metaphor.
coherence. It's
Oh,
on the
it's
side of
perfect.
hostility. You're
The
participating in hostility. That's what I think you
The
said.
participation in the system is a lot like what happens when somebody becomes a Mr. Smith or Agent Smith or something in the Matrix.
Right.
Because like if you think about it, you're selling your whole body into the capitalistic system, becoming one of its drones and doing whatever the fuck.
But like through ignorance, like it's not. You don't even know. You're just pushed as a child into that trap.
Oh no, it's good to have a job.
And it's good to have a purpose. It's good to have a direction.
I meant that sarcastic.
Yeah.
Purpose, yes, but a job.
Well, if that's You're
most
it's
jobs.
part of the dopamine cycle. That
Well, that's-
keeps you
yeah.
living as well.
Well,
So-
well, that's the whole reward punishment, the idea.
Such a great discussion.
But all of this is like,
today, but also that the ADD stuff, dopamine cycles, capture of reward and punishment, right?
Yeah,
yeah, reward and punishment
Just like a
always
conveyor belt.
detracts from the point, right? It's
Conveyor
just,
belt.
but that's
That's how you shift
that's
from.
like the underlying system, right?
Well, reward and punishment is what detracts from a true, what we would call the true empathetic response to the narrative itself, because it shifts the narrative from being that always
Yeah.
by punishing it, by punishing you for looking at it,
Right.
and rewarding you for doing anything but that.
Yeah. Would you? Well, I mean,
It's-
it's like
I think it's kind of subconscious though, and it could be manipulated basically.
Well,
however,
The other thing is that we're born ignorant, so how would we know not to do that?
here's a
We
question.
feel the effect of it, yes, but do
Right.
we know what to do with
Here's a
that?
question: would you ever
you
choose?
can recognize that you know how to game it though.
It took
Right?
me
If
40.
you knew how your serotonin and your
It took me
dopamine-
40 years to articulate anything useful about how I feel.
Right.
40 years. So, I mean,
39.
sure. Some.
Why? So what have you been doing the past 40 years then?
I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. That's the thing. Like, we don't know what we're doing up until we've recognized the problem, and then we're already like way past the point of being very pliable and learning and all that. We're not kids anymore.
Right.
This
We
reminds
have
me
to
of
kick old habits and all that shit.
I think like in the
That's when the
in the
programming happens,
like
though.
Jewish
Your
religion,
morality.
you'd have like people. You only at age of 40 or 50, like you can rise up in the clergy or whatever. Like what is it like? Then you can read and learn the secrets of life and all that shit.
Yeah, when you're fucking
After
when
it's
you're
ready.
brain dead.
Specific age. It's like at this age then you
When-
can.
when
Like,
you're-
Then you're ready
when you're
to
done.
learn.
When you're
is
done
that?
being able to change your ability to
when
be
you
flexible.
when you can't
and
change
evolving.
anything, then you learn the secrets.
Fucking
Oh,
bullshit.
Cool.
I'm coming back. I just
Cool.
gotta grab something.
Alright.
Nice.
I'm gonna
Take a look.
Well, break time then it is. back into whatever it was we were talking about. And what was that again? Empathy, sympathy,
Right.
Yeah, like I think
colonic modeling.
if you were to ask me, and I know nobody will, um,
Come on.
I think the
Have faith in yourself,
best
Jenny.
takeaway from the discussion of empathy and sympathy will always come back down to empathizing with the narrative
I think we beat that like a
and
dead horse by now.
and sympathizing with artifacts. That is to say,
So
um,
artifact is what it looks like.
that is to say, yeah, not to get kicked off the narrative by what's happening, but accept what's happening as part of that narrative, and thereby expressing actual empathy towards
Yeah.
the people to whom things happen.
And relationships happen between everybody, every person. There's some sort of relationship, you could say. People get to know each other, peering and all that. And learning how to properly place empathy can really do a lot to de-escalating all of our problems and wars and little battles we have with each other. Like that. This is something like that could be like wildfire across the world if people could realize how to have real empathy.
I think it could be used positively and negatively too, right? Because it can also be a debilitating thing where it's like,
Well,
oh, I'm doing this for your own good.
yeah,
Right?
this is the charlatan perspective that we keep also hammering on. The charlatan will take
That's a
bits and-
projection, though, isn't it?
That's
That's
projection.
the
That's
false
where
empathy
it's
we were
false
talking about.
empathy
Yep.
and-
Yeah, they
Exactly.
take bits and pieces of truth. It's the same with the moral outrage. You take bits and pieces of truth and you stretch them to the point where you can fit the lie into the script, right?
Right.
And the lie is intended to divert from that empathy towards to take that energy that would have been put into it and do other work with it. It's siphoning. It's parasitic,
Right.
is what it is. Let's call it by what it is.
Like manipulation.
And the other thing I wanted to mention, as you were saying about talking to other people, well, it also makes sense from the perspective of talking to yourself. So not only the way
Your
you
self
relate,
relationship.
not only the way one would be relating to the other people and sympathizing with their what it looks like, but also taking that in and using that upon yourself
Empathizing.
and empathizing with the narrative, but sympathizing with the artifacts of your life. In other words, another way of looking at it is that none of it is your fault per se. Like none of the systemic stuff is your fault,
Right.
but it is your responsibility in how you react.
So sympathizing.
Because that reaction is what makes or breaks the very same system to begin with.
Like empathy seems obvious as a responsibility or sort of like a call to action, if you will, internalize. Sympathy also seems to have that responsibility side to it in that there is something to be done about what things look like. How, like I see that happening, I see
Yeah.
that happening.
It's
This
not
is
about the-
aside from the empathizing with the person.
It's not about being a
Sympathy-
hermit inside yourself.
Sympathy is like a taking in of the environment of what's going on.
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at
But there's action that comes from that.
yeah, a lot of people look at Buddhism and all of these kind of esoteric religions and see the monks and how they retract from society and all of that, and they assume that it's all about, moving away from why things are happening. Like, so the
Right.
general
Escapism.
explanation- Yeah, so which happens absolutely in Buddhism happens, like as we can see across the world. But the thing is that the usual Buddhist explanation for doing something like that is to retreat for a little while to regain yourself, and then once you're prepared to go back into that same world. So
Right.
the idea is not to stay in a monastery your whole life, right? It's to use the monastery as a kind of a quieting ground where you can ground yourself with the reality of how things are, if you will, because society is very pushy, right? to its own needs, to pay taxes, feed your family, all of that stuff. So back in the ancient days, the solution was, if your family, especially if your family was well off, Buddhism started off as a middle class thing. If your family was well off and taken care of, had servants, it's India. So we're talking about like well off people.
Yeah.
So somebody in that position can afford to take time and disappear for a couple of years, get themselves regrounded in the world. And it was all seen as virtuous activity, right? Like, come back to the world. Perhaps you're not going to take on the established roles of the father and whatever, but now you're like this teacher and you have a different position in society, which, again, in that social context, this was all seen as a positive. It was not seen as abandonment of the family or any of that stuff. They were well-off people. Right. It was just like the relationship between the interactions changed. Like
That's an interesting context.
To come back to your family as a sage was something that was seen as a virtue, not as a selfish.
I guess if
Not-
your
neither-
physical
neither-
needs are being met, then
Neither
you
s-
can
neither
work
side
on your mental more.
Yeah.
yeah, neither side
Yeah, who's
saw
paying for that education?
neither side of that coin saw it as a net negative at all. Like, both sides saw it as positives. So
Yeah.
we're not talking about like modern day people disappearing from their families,
Right.
and leaving them to fend for
But
themselves.
they were like almost like a shaman or like
for their hippie
Right.
expedition into India.
Right.
Like, those are not the same scenes. So just I'm saying all that because it's very easy to get
And now,
lost. in
at the same
translation.
time, in a modern context, this kind of happens with like mental health. Just people going into like a spin, their total life gets out of control because they have this realization of like,
It's
who
more
am I? Who am I in this world? And all this kind of like shit can just collapse right on you.
Oh yeah.
Which is ironic because if you think about it from like as the sidelines, they leave the family one way or the other. Either they break down or they do something for themselves that prevents that from happening in the first place. But either way, the family does not get that person. Like when that
What do you mean?
What you're saying is like the weight of society cracks you, right?
Right.
So when you're cracked, you're taken out of all of your different roles.
You're pushed out of
done.
it. It's not a.
So one way or
intention,
the other, there needs
necessarily.
to be a leave. Either it's forced or not. Makes no difference.
Right. Either it's celebrated
still
or not.
happens. Like, it happens one way or
Or
that's all I'm
supported.
saying. And that's all I'm saying. Like your midlife crisis, for example. Another great example of somebody checking right the fuck out of the life that they're in. It's a breaking point.
Mm-hmm. It's a very classic archetype.
Well, it's the way we Hollywooded it into existence. That's how we think of it
Right.
now.
And because it still happens in many lives, maybe most, at some point.
And most people
Well, how
only,
does that manifest though?
well, most people only have Hollywood
Buy a
for
new car.
example.
Buy a
right?
car.
Most people
Right, They're
have
trying to be like the younger. version of
Yeah.
yourself.
those
Well,
are
life
those
is
are the myths people
almost over.
get stuck in their head, right? Like the myth to be young
Hmm.
is somehow important, or to have this shiny car is somehow
Power.
important.
Power,
so,
power.
They're
so
in
the-
denial that they're in
and
the
that's-
twilight of their life.
and
opposed to-
that's why it's so predictable too, because there's so little few narratives that actually express what midlife crisis is.
Right.
All you need to do is just pick one out of a fucking catalog,
Yep.
and you'll be just like all of them, basically.
I think it's just like a realization that life is finite, and basically, you're trying to push yourself back to whenever you were younger, right?
Uh,
Maybe
I
either in a
think
mental state or a maturity
I think,
state,
like,
right?
What about the
The-
meaninglessness of the system?
the meaninglessness and the experience of how shitty it feels to keep droning on, use in this ego system
Right.
where I am my name, and I have my honor and all this kind of stuff in society.
Mhm.
And the
And
word,
you realize that there's no good things happening
And-
for the
and-
rest of
and
your
the
life.
wor- and the words
and it's
pop
like,
in your
because
head.
I'm stuck in this, that's what the end of life is. And so you realize that that's my story from now until the day I die.
and
Am
eventually,
I going to be in this or not?
And eventually, these words come to mind. This can't be it. Like, this just can't be it. Like
Right, that's the-
that's the
But you're
cracking
eliminating
point.
like all these futures though. You're basically like pigeonholed your mind state
But-
into
but-
thinking,
but-
okay, this
exactly,
is the only direction
yeah.
I can go.
But in the,
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
Till the
there's,
day you
like,
die.
a million different other possibilities.
Till the
for
day you
things
die.
can do.
That's the realization, I think. Which
but you're
doesn't
working in
happen.
a system that is shutting down the blinds
In
on
younger
every
times.
possible window
Mhm.
to begin with. Like you're being streamlined as it is,
Yeah.
and the breaking point is like, this can't be it. Like I keep looking left and right. I know there are windows,
That's
but
pretty
they keep
interesting.
being shut down from
Yeah.
by other factors that have nothing to do with me. What the fucking fuck?
And it's all like, this is how society is, and that's what
Meanwhile-
everybody does.
Meanwhile, you look at life, you look at nature, and none of it happens there.
Mhm.
You don't see, like, yeah, animals kill animals to eat. Cool. They don't say, hey, buddy, if you step 1 foot over here, you gotta pay me those 2 shiny pebbles over there. Go dig. Like, what the fuck is that? Like, what kind of activity is that? Right? Like, and this is what we're doing to ourselves. And then, yeah, midlife crisis comes along because you already have the experience of doing it, right? Like, it doesn't come before because you're kind of anxious to get out.
Right.
But you get out and it's still shit, right? Like, remember wanting to grow up so you can do things,
Right.
and then all you're met with is, yeah, you don't make enough money to do anything at all.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, your minimum wage job is just enough to eat shit food, and live in a shit apartment. You know.
But
what I
you
mean?
were set up with the wrong goals to begin with because you were never gonna have that.
Well, at least now you can drink.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And that's all you do at the end of the day because that's all
Right.
you have freedom to do.
But like I said, I think it just starts with you're setting off with the wrong goals.
Starts off with what your parents have,
Right. And yeah.
and all that too. It starts off with all the bullshit you've been fed.
And then they can
Yeah,
potentially debilitate
and
you
what's
with
school
their
for if
empathy, though, because it's like, oh, they don't want you to make the same mistakes they did.
But how many of them
They
have
didn't
a-
realize that by you making those mistakes is actually how you learned and progressed. So they didn't even give you the chance to
That's
make that
actually a
mistake.
form of
so
Generational
you're gonna
trauma.
be, yeah.
It actually flip flops
Right.
often because
And then
one will be let wild, the next will be strict.
Yeah,
The
right.
next
Chain.
generation wild, the next strict.
Right, and then you're basically disabling your kids. So like those millionaires that hand down their wealth to their kids, they're actually fucking them up because it's killing any desire
And-
for them to make that for themselves.
and literally none of them have a Zhenya, Dustin. Fuck, my brain is going. My apologies. Dustin.
Dustman.
It's okay.
I am actually quite shitty with names, so it's not a personal thing.
I don't.
But I did remember, so give me credit a little bit.
You're
Dustin
forgiven.
or O'Brien to point any of this out, right? Like, because if it's not pointed out,
Right.
what I mean is that they don't have an inclination to point this out, it out to themselves.
Right.
Nor do most people have the time to even do that. It just continues.
Right.
If you and it comes back to even like if you don't put language to it, can't describe it.
Right.
Why we're doing what we're doing, why we're fucking driving our own selves crazy, creating a quote unquote language, because we want to talk about it
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Yeah.
and actually talk about it. Not if I talk about a soul and a zeitgeist and all of that stuff, I want those words to mean something. So that when Brian was talking about zeitgeist, that feeling that everybody has, something's fucking wrong.
Right.
The personal lack that you feel, the quality of lack, is what I call soul. So it's not like an object in theology, if you will. It's more like the quality with which the world feels, that wrongness, so call it.
At the
Everything to
individual
do-
level.
Yeah.
So the premise is that because the system operates without you in mind, it causes neglect. That neglect builds up over time. It's not qualified as anything, but there is a feeling. There's a quality of wrongness, as I keep pointing out.
It's kind of nihilistic, though.
No, it's just an admission that it happens. It's not. It's not to say that this is the.
It's just to talk about the
It's just to be
feeling.
able to express that this neglect causes something qualitative, and this quality we refer to that as on the personal scale, like what you feel. That's your soul. Like that's your personal. Um,
And it's like
essence
it's a
of that-
motivating
of that problem.
It's a motivating factor.
Collectively, this is what we call the zeitgeist, the know, the what everybody knows to be true, but isn't quite able to express. So
That there's something wrong with the Matrix.
Yeah. So again, we're not talking about an entity.
Could just be a perception thing, though.
Well, it is. It's a quality of how things keep being perceived through neglect, perpetual neglect. So
Right.
as neglect builds upon neglect, as builds upon neglect, that little ball, if you will, of things that don't happen for you properly, builds up. It doesn't have a name. It doesn't have anything like you can't qualify.
It's not acknowledged by
It's
the
not
system.
acknowledged by anything.
It's the
so you
lost
can't
potential in
talk
a way.
about it,
It's
which is
the-
why we use the word soul to
like
give meaning to that word, to
the
that
inverse
feeling,
of
and have an
potential.
actual meaningful way to talk about that feeling.
It's that realization of lost potential at every interaction.
And the
Yeah, like regrets.
and the choice for the word soul.
Just you feel how it could have been more. You feel you got ripped off at every turn.
Yeah, the choice for the word soul is to kind of piggyback on the Christian sense of
save.
every soul is quote unquote
Needs to be saved.
needs to be saved. So that's feeling of dread. I'm capitalizing.
There's
on
some
that.
kind of action that needs to be taken.
It's like
So,
it's
so
like a
we're
brand-
we're appropriating here.
It's like a
Like, we
branding
need to
shit.
understand that. Like we're trying
Yeah.
to make soul into an actual actionable word that makes sense.
But
Yeah.
it's useful in language, not just some fucking thing you gotta save for reasons.
Yeah.
It
Like
needs-
there's
yeah.
a real something
Yourself.
to fix.
And-
So it has that negative connotation in the same sense that Christianity does, but that's mostly to capitalize on the word and its already existent people's understanding. So there is a kind of like it is in a state of debt, but it's not a real debt. The debt is part of this fake spin of the system itself, right? So the debt is real in the feeling sense, not in the real sense, not in the physical sense.
Yeah. So you're like your essence, your
Yeah.
recognition of yourself, I guess. Like
Yeah.
your self-perception.
And to say that within the system,
Or yourself as an entity, or yourself as a sovereign individual, or
Yeah. So the soul being tied to the system's neglect, perpetual neglect, always posits it as a negative quality. Like it's experienced always negatively. But our solution isn't to save our souls, so to speak, but to remove the neglect to begin with, so that the causes behind it don't have room to work with.
so why does it need to be a negative thing, though?
No, it's
it's a rallying
it's a-
cry for people who feel that. This is simply a way to write a book to bring people on board.
We're just
to-
saying
to
that
start a
feeling
book.
that you have in the personal sense, something is fucking wrong. Call that the soul. Instead of saying, oh, some ontological entity is a soul, and you're trying to compare which aspects of you are that. No, you take the quality that is experienced collectively already,
Yo, pass it on.
and that is meaningful, that has a meaning, because of how we defined it. Use that to because that's a far more meaningful quote unquote entity to deal with. It's we're talking about the neglect of the system that is imposed upon you.
Right.
The system neglects when we as people operate through systemic means such as ego, and that's
Yeah.
how we interact. Oh, do you have money? Okay, I'll make your burger. Da 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 da. It feels like there's something
The
missing.
soul is not
Something is
negative.
missing there. Like
The soul is not negative. The soul points to something that's negative. That its existence is pointing to something out there that else, otherhood, if you will. A reflection of that. Something is wrong out there, That's wrongness is reflected in here.
And it's like the more it's wrong out there, the more of a soul you have and feel. Kind of, it's a weird thing. Like the soul should almost, like in our model, should almost just evaporate once it, because it's like it's what motivates you to fix things back towards the way that things should be, in a way. That this capitalist system is causing this vacancy of all meaning in every interaction.
So to even
and
say,
it's like that feeling is the soul, and that's what causes this collective soul at the zeitgeist, at the world stage. Like at the world stage, to think, what should the organization and order of our world be?
and the
That's
way
the
you're
fucking
saying
zeitgeist.
and the way you're saying it actually paints the soul as a more of a positive force in and of
It
itself.
is a positive force, but it's a
reaction.
feeling. It's that feeling of
A
something
reaction
missing.
to something negative in a positive.
This is the motivation.
to fix it,
This is the motivation of the guild,
right? Because you wouldn't be calling it wrong if you wanted to stay that way.
because our souls must be saved.
So,
Because they're fucked up
so
right
we're
now.
giving a different meaning to the word saving a soul.
Yeah,
that
it's kind
still
of
speaks to the same concept.
It is
really.
kind of funny. Like that's how we appropriate things. So like it should kind of make sense, or like if you should kind of, the words should be close to what they were used for normally. But
Well,
yeah,
this-
like your conception of a soul, it's like, oh, it's me, my true essence, and like in that kind of stuff, we would point to like the sentient machine, right? Like sentience, the fact of this manifold between
Well, you don't-
model and reality
Sentience
of the
doesn't.
neurochemical network.
Sentience sees the soul as an artifact, not as an empathetic element of existence itself.
Right, and that's why it's fine for it to just kind of go away. If it does actually go away, then that means it's perfect. Right, the kind of unachievable thing, and so soul will always be a part of everything because there's always the other, the outsideness, the
So-
conflict with the world, and that
So what
never
we're
goes away.
saying, what we're really saying here is that the priority of what to do, if you will, with all of this information is to basically deal with one's own quote-unquote soul to the point of where it's no longer an issue, such that you can recognize soul sympathetically in all membership and deal with that on its own terms rather than being punished or rewarded or any of those things that make soul to begin with. So it steps out of being something that you're personally a personal quality, but a quality that just is of what it looks like, if you will, like you were saying.
To step back,
Yeah.
not be in it. That would be the kind of perfection, I guess, of soul.
Yeah, and there's no
Would be
nihilism
to
in it.
acknowledge that we can feel and calculate these kind of transgressions of the system upon us, but we don't have to identify with that.
Yeah.
To you. We don't have to be in that. So this is like the human above the animal.
We don't have to
sort of
be
way.
agents of it, if you will, like becoming allowing the system to control the behaviors.
Right.
Rather have the behaviors again to butcher the word again, to have it stem from the empathetic love sort of justice qualitative perspective of membership, to throw more words into it.
That works.
Well, that's what the words are for, really, to just build on the qualities.
Mm-hmm.
All that said, it's a fucking impossible task for us regular folks. By impossible, I don't mean it's not doable. I just mean
That's an acknowledgement.
it's one thing to say all of these things. It's a completely different game to try and shift your own psyche towards just seeing things that way. So, yeah.
I like the idea of perfection, and also how most people wish to look up to a hero role model. This is why the charlatan is always like right there, a hot commodity.
Yeah. Charisma is unfortunately perpetual
But like that's tough because we're obviously not putting ourselves as, we're not saying we are the role model.
That's
You
the
know what
thing.
I'm saying? Like,
That's
as
the
much as
thing.
we're
Well,
out
it's,
here.
it's competence.
That's the
'Cause-
thing, though.
Oh my
like,
God, we're
we
here.
have- we
We're
have so many-
drinking. We're drinking.
We have
oh
so
my
many
God.
different ways of approaching the same idea that, and both Brian and I actually like out of
Smoking.
based on our own description about those how to approach these things, we fall out of the spectrum for the majority of people. So we divide it up into like 4 different ways of looking at it. One is academic, one is
I'm
pragmatic.
trying to follow, but you're talking about temperaments now.
Yes. One
The
is
kind of types of
pragmatic.
people.
Like
Not
don't
types of
stop
people,
talking,
but
just do, and I'll follow.
preferred cognition.
Right. Then there's the
Your
role
preferred
model.
way that your mind works to interact.
They all include each
to
other.
interact with the
They
environment.
all include each other, so you don't fit neatly into one of the categories.
Not
Well, you
not
can be
exclusive.
multiple roles.
It's just
as well, I
yeah,
think.
just as the one
You
of them
are-
is usually dominant. One of them is just
Sure.
usually gonna
Usually a
dominate.
preference, right?
And what we find is that most people
I think we've
go
talked
fall
coherent
into what's called
temperaments
devotional temperament, and a devotional temperament is mimicry of a role model.
With Dustin. I think we've talked about temperaments before.
Now,
There's
I
academic, pragmatic,
I fall into
devotional,
academic.
and then perceptive.
Yeah.
There's the 4.
I fall into
I think
academic.
you lean perceptive.
You fall
Dustin.
pragmatic. So
Pragmatic,
neither of
academic.
us make really great role models because we don't speak that language very well.
Mhm.
And this
Right.
this is to grand mastery, which is kind of allows you to go
adopt
into that
whichever
model.
one.
That yeah.
So if you're an academic, but you can talk easily to your devotional as a role model, just like exert that
you know what?
Well,
persona,
and you can't be good at everything, and that goes back to that as well, right?
which
I
is
mean,
why
you
we call it
can-
grand mastery. It's
Oh.
it's like that unreachable, if you will,
Yeah.
seat.
To be good at every level of it, that's
It's meant to be
very rare.
it's meant to be a kind of like a
Mhm.
nebulous status, right? There's mastery, which you can. It's like if you're academic and you're speaking to another academic, it should be just you should be able to catch each other quite
Sure.
easily. You're speaking similar languages, not same but similar.
Yeah. So like
when
how
when
layers
you're going like
happen.
way across the board, though,
Another layer on top of that is temperament, I guess.
that is temperament.
But that's within your own temperament. That's temperament
You were
without
talking-
even being aware of
Oh, you're-
temperaments. You
so
can have that discussion. Add a
Ingress,
layer onto
ingress.
that, and it's like, well, you could be an academic talking to a pragmatic.
Yeah. So
Now, how do you talk to the pragmatic? Because they have completely different worldview in mind and like what
So-
they want to hear.
so on top of
They want
being-
puzzle pieces and machines and blocks and okay, tell me this does that in
So
this role.
this is ingress.
This person does that. Never mind the theory and all the pie in the sky shit that he'll blab off, right? I want the, for example, pragmatic, practical. Tell me the protocols. What are the pieces of the puzzle that things are being made of?
So
Right.
ingress is the second side of the coin. If your temperament is pragmatic or whatever, you have a preference, right? But then there's also the way you speak to other people. That's your ingress. Ingress is like your approach.
Yeah, direct or
So we've divided up along the same lines. You can have like the intellectual, or the practical, or the personal, or the relational, right? So you approach, relational then personal. So for example, to be quote unquote a grand master, you have to match your ingress to their temperament. So you'd approach somebody,
Right.
somebody who's devotional from a relational perspective.
So
for
so you know how to
example.
manipulate
So-
situations.
a master who can
Do that.
speak, let's say academic. So what were the 4? Relational. Here, I'll write them down. What
So
what was it
it's
again?
the ability to recognize how to approach each situation and each individual.
But
Usually
hold on,
said is
hold on,
meet
hold on.
them where they're at.
yeah, it's understandable.
Isn't that smart? So like from mastery, let's say you can explain academic very well to your fellow academians
Right.
about this perceptive, all this cognitive stuff.
Give me the pencil.
Ingress, grand mastery. So that's mastery. Mastery, the ability to talk. Grand mastery is the ability to. You're learning that's just one ingress,
Right.
the academic ingress. There's also the pragmatic, the devotional, the perceptive.
Intellect.
Yeah, I can write it down.
Yeah, what I'm taking from it is
Int-
you're
Intellectual.
able to navigate
Yeah.
all these different levels and be able to communicate.
Okay, what?
Intellectual, practical.
Sorry, yep. Devotional,
Is
ingress.
relational and personal.
Personal.
So what I take
Right,
away
right.
from that is the Grand Master is able to communicate on all these different levels, dealing with different people.
For this,
The way that people think.
for the
Yeah.
s-
In
On
these
their-
four,
on their
in these
level.
four kind of pseudo categories or
for
whatever.
the sake of practicality, when you're thinking about yourself in these categories, you gotta.
So in a sense, I think it is attainable, quote
So,
unquote.
so,
but
to- so I just want to make a point here. When you're thinking about these positions, and sometimes you're a member, sometimes you're a master, and very rarely you might actually hit a grandmaster note as well. Those are not
hitting the note.
Those are not static things.
This
So
reminds me
what
of
I'm
playing
saying
like
is-
pinch notes on guitar. It's like, holy shit, that sounded amazing. But can I do that again? I don't know. It's
Yeah.
not. It's not
Right, so
me.
you're the master
It's not
of the
me
moment.
now. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that's my status. So I've
So,
achieved that or
For
whatever.
practical
You were
purposes,
masterful in that moment.
Yeah, exactly.
for
That's
practical
it.
purposes, the mere recognition of other membership
And that's
is
key.
membership.
That's critical. That's so.
The
critical.
ability to speak to participants and make sense of membership on one ingress, on your ingress. So, so if you're an academic speaking intellectually to other academics, that's how they map together, like one to one. Then that's like mastery. So you're able to get participants to make the jump, make sense of the jump, if you will, to membership, or to start recognizing it to some. Basically, why it's mastery is because you're communicating.
Right.
If you achieve your goal, you're obviously communicating well. You've mastered the thing you're talking about to begin with. That's where that word is tied to. Grand mastery, for practical purposes, appears when you are, say, like me, an academic, talking to, say, you. If you are a perceptive, then it would be me taking the personal approach, and actually using that to make sense to you as well. I don't think I'm doing that right now, so don't worry. I do not qualify as one whatsoever. I don't feel that in any, but in the moment, right? That situation, you see there is in that context. There's grand mastery. So that's what a grandmaster should be looked at. Is like this. It's not a role model, but it is. It's like this, almost like superhuman type of thing that doesn't really exist, but it does exist in the moment. Right. So it's not unattainable, but it's not like godhood, or it's not like it doesn't apply to any of these things. It's a completely different fucking ballgame.
Well, I think the music jamming metaphor was already the perfect.
music is a great metaphor always.
Already said it, right? Like I can play that pinch harmonic at the perfect moment, and I didn't even know if that point would lead to a pinch harmonic, and it just like, because how do you know? Like it's almost like a hidden dark notes on the string of like what will. Oh, it's crazy. It's you're not pushing even it down.
Right.
You're just barely holding your finger on it. So it's like based on the length of the string. Well,
What's interesting is there's
Can
room
you
for
replicate
mastery
that?
of that.
you do hit the fret, but also you're using your thumb, and you don't know where the harmonic is on the string, on the rest of the string, right? So you're pressing a note. That rest of the string has waves going like that, and they call it nodes. They call it nodes. You know, where you have like, let's say a full wavelength and a half wavelength will intersect at many nodes.
Mm-hmm.
A quarter wavelength, they'll keep intersecting, right? It's like the inches
That's,
on your...
that's what brings notes together. Yeah.
So if you push your finger, tap it right at that point where where many intersect, it allows those ones to continue, but everything else is removed as noise. And what you get is like an octave higher octaves. I don't know, like some like really high squealy noise.
It's like nothing else matters.
Like all the energy of the string is converted to doing that one note, and it just like
Can do
lifts
it
it up,
here.
lifts it up an octave.
See, I'm not pressing it. Or if I do,
Yeah, yeah.
It brings it an octave higher.
I don't know if they call that like that's harmonics. I don't know if they call that one pinch harmonic.
Well, it's a similar idea, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like that shows how you can play a note that's outside of the scale of the guitar.
And I never even touched the
fretboard.
the fretboard.
You just
I just touched
one
the
string, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like that's as an example, how do you know what is grand mastery or what was like message received? It's like that was
When it
fucking
happens and it feeds
bombing.
back.
That was amazing. Like everybody's like just totally jacked up about the what you just jammed out, right?
It
Some
resonates.
kind of magic.
There's that word again.
Yep.
We use the word resonate.
So that you can't say, oh, now I put my badge on. I am this level. I've created the good jam.
Can I-
or
That's like
resonated.
being an artist,
can I
though, right? You're
interject?
just creating something from nothing.
Yeah, and
Sure.
one moment to the next, you never know what's gonna come out.
So do you remember
Right.
how I was talking about you go from significant down to the fundamental to just be able to speak, for example, and then it has to be reinterpreted back up, and there's like a whole thing could not happen. So when it does, that oscillation between the layers in the significant part,
Yeah.
if you ignore
Call it resonating.
if you ignore the fundamental layers through which it's going through,
You see those higher
this
layers
is what we call
are
resonations. So, and we call those wakes. Like, you know how a boat goes through water, it has a wake? So we call those resonance wakes. And they all happen everywhere at once, kind of thing. Everybody's talking, everybody's thinking, everybody's doing it. And it's all intersecting together. And there's a metaphor behind there. Is like you got
This-
your peaks with meaning and your dives with noise.
speaking of mathematics, Fourier transform. Do you think that is?
I think that's a fractal.
That's the same thing, matching the like fuzziness to a curve or whatever. And you've like kind of
Do you know fractals?
that's what's resonating is that the fact of that sound itself, right?
A fractal is like a picture, and you zoom into and there's different borders and colors and shapes, and you zoom into like a border, and the entire shape repeats itself in the border. And you zoom into that, the entire shape repeats itself.
But yeah,
in
I think
different
it,
ways.
it would be, yeah.
Is
And
that
it's-
with the red?
there's
there's
different
a fucking way to see it though, right?
there's
Like,
different ways to there's different videos on it and
Like
shit
you,
like
you
that.
split it up with like a red lens or something. And
No.
then you can see the mirror or
Often it's the Mandelbrot set, they call it. It's
Yeah.
like this big sphere with some off spheres, but you keep looking, it zooms in on these off spheres, and you just see the big sphere again.
The same
coming.
pattern
But you're
repeating
going
on the
in.
smaller branches, the same
Yeah,
pattern
yeah,
repeating
yeah.
on those smaller branches,
Yeah.
and it goes into infinity.
right.
And so what you have is a finite shape with an infinite edge.
Okay, it's pretty cool.
And it all fits into itself.
Yeah. Neat.
Infinite edge, yeah. And that's like
That's the property. That's
how
the
do you-
property that you get out of it.
how do
It's
you
an
tell the
infinite
length of a
edge.
coastline? If
It's-
you're
it's the
going to
same
measure
thing.
every single sand grain and assume the water's flat and non-moving, measure every sand grain, the distance, you'll like,
Oh, it's way bigger.
yeah, you have to cut off like chunks.
No, it actually faces the same problem when you do.
Yeah, it's
when
like
you, when
a
you
line,
zoom in,
line segment.
when you
kind
zoom
of-
into a coast,
Right.
it becomes an infinite edge. Like that you can't lengthwise. When
Yeah.
you try to do any of the mathematical calculation, it gives you an infinite edge.
Right. There's
Hmm.
no way to.
So I
properly
think we see
calculate
the
that.
same thing in the resolution
I
of
think.
of an image.
Don't quote me.
Fourier transform like JPEG imaging. To take a bitmap and make it into a JPEG image goes through the Fourier transform. I think,
Oh, okay.
right?
I don't
And
know
that-
what that
that's-
entails.
Kind of a way of obviously compressing it, but it's like this question of resolution of what resolution are you taking on that coastline or that.
To give you an idea what the hell he's talking about, on a bitmap, the way a bitmap works is that you have a coordinate system, X and Y, kind of a thing, and color.
You tell the color of the whole grid. Just
And
every
so you
single
divide everything
pixel
out, and you
is
divide everything into pixels,
is in text.
and you say this is that color, this is that color. It's a lot of information, a ton of information.
Mhm.
A JPEG, instead of doing that, has some kind of formulas internally to extrapolate what this area should be colored, what that area should be colored, and do all of that. So it's compressed in terms of a PNG is like a full-blown compression algorithm where it's just math. So that's kind of, I think
the Fourier transform is used in a lot of things.
so. It's a transformation that takes grids and generalizes them into different shapes so that it can be recombined together to recreate what's in the grid.
Mhm.
Did I get it right?
Well, you can see it in the image itself.
Or-
It doesn't become so like
I-
pixelated, but it becomes a fuzzy thing. If you were to zoom into
Like
it,
gradients.
Right. Yeah. It does calculations on that.
yeah, it's like averaging kind of things
I was
together and just mashing it.
Gradation,
If this whole
right?
chunk is black, like
Oh, I was
piece
thinking of
cake.
vector graphics, so it's similar but different. Yeah.
Hey Brian, what's this part?
That's called curve
When you-
face
when
frame
you gave
bead.
it to me, I'm like, this has got to be a rib. At first, I'm like,
It's a
why are you
giant's
giving me-
rib.
What the hell?
It's a curved face frame bead. I don't know why there's an
not
extra.
for what I not
16th
for what
on
I
it.
Be right
heard,
back, guys.
No, it's no.
Okay.
It's painted.
I was gonna say it's not for my project, part of the project though.
No,
Pretty cool.
not at all. Yeah.
What did you do for my parts like that?
What do you mean? Do
Well,
for?
because I've got parts that are on top of the door that are.
Just hit a break here.
Significant.
So, sound is fundamental. Music significant.
With music being
Right.
significant.
Yeah, of course.
Music.
To relate layers.
Yes. Music is fundamental. Song is significant.
Ah, yes. So,
So it doesn't. It depends on the context. You see. Like I just wanted
song
to give an
significant.
example and
right. So, song is
just
above
wanted-
music.
I just wanted to
I
give
agree.
an idea that
Well,
there's no
it's an
two layers.
arrangement.
It's just
This is
a
a-
relationship between layers.
This is an example of describing that relationship. So we have language to do that now.
And I think music is the arrangement of sound.
And the song is the arrangement of music.
Exactly. You can tell intuitively which one is more significant and which one is more fundamental.
Right.
Because
and this is part of the holonic model, is that they stack in layers. So that we're talking about organization, we're using this language. What is fundamental? What is significant? 100%.
and again,
and it's
you can't
intuitive.
have one without the other. It's not about. It's not
Right.
like.
They coexist.
And I just gave you an idea of why music can be both fundamental and significant. It just depends on which aspect you're looking at it. You're not going to be able to.
True. Yep.
You're not going to be.
Good
working-
example.
You're not going to be working with sound if you were not working with music, and you generally don't work with music if you're not making a song.
Right.
Unless
Both-
you're jamming.
And those are not exclusive to
But it
each
depends
other,
how
of
you
course.
define song.
Yeah.
It also depends on what you're looking at, right? Like what you're zooming into.
Right.
So there's no real limit to what's significant, and there's no real limit to what's fundamental. You can take that approach to every single aspect.
Just using it as language acknowledges the holonic,
And this is-
holonic stacking.
And this is actually will make sense why we use the words order and chaos, right? What we're trying to do, we're trying to arrange the fundamental layer from some kind of uncoordinated chaotic state to say something of significance in the significant layer.
Right.
So that combination of chaos is a representation of some kind of order and not noise. Signal versus noise. Right, like just like in the radio.
Signal and noise. Signal to noise ratio is important,
Right.
depending on the power of your capacity to interpret.
So again, we're not like talking about new things ever. We're talking about the same damn things everybody else is talking about. And trying to like really understand what the fucking conversation is about.
Yeah, it's been a good conversation today. I'm quite satisfied.
Right on.
For one.
I only mentioned this to like just kind of point out that we didn't come up with all of this crap at random. Like it all kind of interrelates to itself in one way or another, and I'm just trying to point out where. I mean, it's 10 years of like shitty diagrams.
on.
Some shit's
They're
not gonna
great.
make sense.
Yeah. Understandable.
10 years of no, it's not been like that.
It's almost 10 years. It's been 8 for sure. I had my breakdown when I was 30. In this shop, it was the Christmas party. I yelled at my mother. I yelled at my sister, and I just like, fuck. It was.
Lost it.
I fucking lost it on. My sister used to take fucking advantage of my parents, like big time.
As women
And
do.
she stepped all over my mom. Well, my mom is also on meds, right? Like, so she's got a
Yeah, but
what you call a stunted response.
Don't forget,
she's not as fast as
we're all
because of it.
subject to this system.
So long
Just
story
like
short,
puppets.
she was like bitching about something, and I'm like, why are you letting her fucking bitch at you like this all the time?
Right.
And I ended up just losing on both of them.
Yeah.
So I didn't help the situation, obviously, but
Sure.
but that was I think that was from that point on is where I started to really engage.
Interesting. So you kind of threw away the chains of expectation, social expectation in a way, and kind of told your truth in the moment. And I think that's interesting
drunk, so-
that you pointed that. That's drinking helps sometimes.
So,
But also you've mentioned that the world seems to you through your early life and things like kind of arbitrary in a sense, just because of his academic nature, like true academic temperament, we would say
Yeah.
has kind of a slightly
It still does.
step back
I
stance to life and what's going on.
I don't
in other words,
understand-
people's narratives and what they were caring about didn't fucking matter
I'll
or make
qualify
sense.
this a little bit.
It's like,
Listen.
why are you getting wrapped in that? You're getting wrapped in that,
right.
right? To an academic, it all seems kind of very
not only that,
childish, arbitrary.
it's getting wrapped up in these weird fucking things that evaporate anyway, and at the same time neglecting to every conversation possible about things that do not. So like, to this day, I don't
not do things?
I generally don't bring this up because it doesn't jam with anybody. So, but I never, to this day, I never understood the taboo surrounding, say, conversation about sexual things, like actual people, what they do.
Yeah,
Because
look at
people
his
do these.
Facebook
Oh, like-
feed.
Right?
Weird fetishes, or like, what do you mean?
Even
No, just the
Including-
fact of
including weird
anything
fetish.
that's in any way sexually provocative, like post memes on Facebook and stuff, right?
It's-
Just because it's a joke that's funny, right?
Right.
But because it has a sexual edge, most people just wouldn't even touch it
Oh,
with a
'cause
39.5 foot
There's
pole.
that, but
people,
also what you
people are
said.
repressing their
But
Right.
also what you said.
Just not engaging.
The
right.
taboos.
Makes people uncomfortable.
All the taboos that people actually still engage in, despite the
Taboos.
fact that they have them.
Right.
Like
right.
most of the
And atheists call themselves non-religious.
it's shit like that. It's like, why are those conversations that uncomfortable? Like, everybody does these things, right? But at the same time, nobody feels, including myself, by the way, nobody feels the kind of comfort that they would in discussing their hockey team or something like that. So it's just like fucking arbitrary shit.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
so that has always been a complete bizarre clusterfuck observation for me, because I don't have, I guess I don't have that filter, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't. So a lot of my younger years were spent in trying to figure out what not to say,
Sure.
or you know, like, because
Just an arbitrary
I
matrix.
made the awesome mistake of admitting to masturbation in 8th grade. That did not go well for me. Despite the fact
What?
that despite the fact that everybody masturbates pretty much on this planet, right?
So you were talking about it was
I just didn't know it was a fucking issue, but I figured that one out pretty quick afterwards.
And I think like this is
It didn't occur to me.
towards
Were you talking about like jerking off to shit porn or something?
No,
and
no,
then somebody
no,
got
just
turned
like-
off by it,
but
or-
just
No,
the
I don't
fact
understand.
nothing weird, just the fact that
Yo,
that
it is
something that
it's nothing
I do.
like
like
this, I
that
think,
was it.
points-
Like, that's the extent of
it's
it.
a weird thing that kind of points towards the academic stance towards the narratives themselves, which are
Right.
seen as almost completely arbitrary. Like just the stories, getting involved into the stories,
Yeah.
you know, and oh, he talked about this, now Zhenya's the masturbator. You know, like that's your narrative.
And
Like
I
that the
don't-
fact that
my
could
mind
just
doesn't
come and
click
float
that
up
way.
into the thing, like he doesn't give a fuck. And I
But-
think that is kind of like academic in a temperament sense, which I think is rare, and most people would not be like that. But I think I acknowledge that I think that that's a valid temperament, and that people have their ways of appropriating reality, of connecting
And
to,
the thing
to
is,
what's
But if
real.
you're putting more value on it than other people are as well.
Well, this is grade 8, remember?
But this isn't
Or,
a
but if, okay,
this
so
isn't a
say-
choice. It's not a
say
choice
you
either.
made your off-color remarks about it.
Dustin.
Somebody maybe made fun of you for it.
No,
It's
no,
not-
somebody.
It's not even a
Everybody.
choice.
Right.
Everybody.
But
Of
did
course.
They
you
all
get
just jumped in.
pissed off whenever
I
they
didn't.
would?
I didn't
they would
understand why
make
they
fun
were
of you for
bothering me.
it, right?
Because, like, in my head, okay, like that was like yesterday. Okay,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
was
yeah.
that was fucking a month ago. That was 3 months ago.
Right.
Who
But
cares?
if you're still making a thing of it, right? Say somebody makes fun of you and then you react to it, then that keeps it going.
What kind of a
right?
thing though? Like I didn't
Right.
go around saying I am that.
No, but
I
if
am.
they were able to get a reaction out of you,
Yeah. So you're
Then
talking
the-
like
the only reaction
more
they got out of
advanced
me is
things
me
that,
walking
that
around
you would
alone
learn
in the fucking
later in life,
in the
because
in,
Zhenya doesn't know how to be an alpha.
yeah, what you need to do is
No, I-
throw back something equally
Right.
embarrassing into their face.
I don't
mean,
face
that's
the
one
same.
way.
Let's put it this
But-
way. I'm not the same.
Exactly.
person I
Like,
was
tell me,
then.
have you masturbated?
Yeah.
If you would have said that to any one of them who pointed, have you masturbated? They
Yeah.
would have fucking turned red.
Yeah,
And the entire situation
then
would be
it would've
Okay,
been
I'm not the
confused,
same
right?
person
Who
I was
knows?
then.
But
I don't
he
have
does-
the same hang
As an academic, Zhenya isn't navigating the narrative, kind of the show of the devotional,
Right.
the devotional
And
temperament.
that's what
all
potentially
over
kept
that.
it going, right? Is because if you're gonna get keyed up by it, whenever
This
they
is just
mention
one
it
examples
again.
of
Yeah.
many. I
yeah.
am only hampering on that one because it stands out for
Oh
me.
no, that's a good example, I guess. Like, I mean,
like
it's pretty funny.
it's very understandable, right?
It is. Yeah.
It's very telling, too. Like
But like yeah, but
most people would just be completely embarrassed even to think about
but the
saying
second
that
but the secondary shit
as a
about it,
joke, even.
when does it become less of part of the identity? The fact that I said something, right? Like, why is it carrying on for an entire goddamn year? That's the other thing that kind of completely fucking confused me because
He didn't
to
clap
me-
back.
Yeah,
to me, I forget this stuff that people. Look, I don't
course.
hang on to anything.
or just dwelling on a certain detail of it, right?
Like I
Just narratives, arbitrary. What does it even matter? That's a story. This is a story.
I've
Right.
almost
Who
I've been
cares?
forgiven to a fault. Like it bit me in the ass kind of a fault before.
Sure.
I am that person. So to me, like, when you don't let go of something, I don't get it.
Right. Yeah.
Because I already not doing that.
Uh-huh.
Right? Like, I've looked.
But that's
especially
what
when
I'm
I've
saying,
learned.
there must have been something to keep it
if
going,
I've-
right?
if I've
Otherwise
wronged you-
it just fizzles
No,
out.
if,
and
if
it
I've
doesn't-
wronged you, for example, right, and you told me that this is what the problem is,
Right.
and I apologize and all that, in my head, I'm never going to do that again.
Right.
Like, I know you don't like it. I know that this is something that is detrimental to any kind of interaction we're going to have from now on.
But that's like an agreement you make
Do you know-
interpersonally,
Do you know
right?
Cameron?
Yeah, oh yeah.
So he has two brothers. His older brother, Eric. I approached him maybe 10 years ago now, maybe somewhere in that range, before my fixing upping of myself. And I was very, very fucking hammered. And I made a comment that he gained his weight back.
Right.
He hates
Something that maybe meant nothing to you, but then,
he hates me to this day.
Right.
But he never really is able to understand that not only am I apologetic for that, and that, like, I didn't even realize it was a mistake to begin with. His entire family was there.
Right.
And so they have all these fucking opinions of me.
Sure. It was
And-
insensitive.
and
You can
imagine-
admit that.
I obviously, like, why would
Right.
why am I mentioning it?
Yeah.
Right? I know.
Yeah.
Like, it had an impact on me. The funny thing is that I didn't know I insulted him until about 2 years after the fact.
Right.
Because Cameron told me.
But he was a little bitch for holding on to that at the same time without addressing
Well, he
it.
asked me.
If you're gonna be
He asked me
holding
about it.
these-
He asked me about it, and I was basically horrified to find out that that's what I did.
Right.
Right? Because I was like,
you didn't
oh,
realize. And
shit.
You didn't realize.
So Cameron knows I meant nothing, but he also knows me, so he knew kind of that I probably just didn't know what I was saying. The filter,
You
my
can't
my
really-
filter. I told you, my
can't say that
filter
as an
is not the
excuse.
same as my filter is entirely gauged by what everybody else is saying.
Right.
My true self is hidden mainly because nobody wants to deal with it. Not because I don't want to be like it's mostly me. It's just certain things I've held back.
Sure.
Don't hold back, man.
No, you do. You want me to.
Okay.
You'll cringe, and I don't care for it.
Explode of cringe.
Well, but
So
it's a
I was
fine
just
line.
mentioning
You
what
need
I
be
said
true
to Eric
yourself.
once upon a time.
Right.
I
But
didn't
True to
know.
yourself,
But
yeah.
that's the thing.
I am true
It
to
didn't
myself
mean
at
anything
this
to
point.
you. But
Well,
it meant
he's
something
that
him.
he's that to a fault. Doesn't it
Right.
seem like? Like he won't accommodate to the narratives going on around him.
Right.
Because it's almost like, and I feel that to some small extent, not even calculated. Like I don't even care sometimes to.
Yeah.
It's like hard. I don't know. It's like an effort to
It's just that
to
everything.
calculate and put together
No,
narratives.
every alternative I've been offered felt like stupid, to be honest with you. It just it feels like it's based in some arbitrary conundrum, and I accommodate it to an extent, but ultimately I can't care for frivolousness because not because I don't care for people, not because I understand that this is something that people are wrapped up in, but because I find that frivolousness to be such a big aspect of the systemic problem that we keep talking about here. Like it's all part and parcel of keeping people distracted from themselves to begin with.
Right.
That I'm almost positioning myself to be like, this is what's fucking wrong. And for anybody to start telling me to behave in any of these wrong ways, you better have a really good fucking reason. Because I'm telling you what my reasons are for this to be so fucking wrong. Right? I spent...
That's activism.
I'm spending all of this time telling you why all of this is wrong.
You tell your
and
boss
you're
that?
telling me I have to keep my mauth shut in some cases. I said...
See?
I've learned my masturbation lesson, right? It's the same shit, actually. So yeah, like, that's my problem, right? Like, so when that's where it's I butt heads with people with like insist that I should appreciate some fucking aspect of a completely fucked up circumstance,
Sure.
and I'm like, so what about this, and that? Shut up.
You're not supposed to point out the hypocrisies.
Yeah. How dare you?
Okay. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so
Sure.
yeah, I don't jive with that, and I stand by what I'm saying, for
Well, I think
as
that's-
much as I can,
you
at
need to.
least.
You need to be like that.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
not saying
typical.
I'm not a
standing up for
hypocrite.
yourself. The system is always hypocritical.
I'm
and
not
it's always
saying
bullshit,
I'm not either.
and the people captivated in it, most of us, and in most cases, are just incapable of engaging at that human level. Like, oh, what about this? Well, as a system, I don't give a fuck what you're about to say. As a person, I do. Like, what's going on around me, my environment? How are people being treated? Right? That, what's the empathy of this
But the
situation?
system has a way of making itself far more important by being far more loud.
Sure.
As in, you're fired.
You're
You're fired. That's it. Get out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, good chats, gentlemen.
Indeed.
Gotta.
Well,
Go and do
Dustin,
something
you
productive.
you definitely
This is what's productive.
you
man.
rounded out
Everything
our-
else is an artifact.
you rounded out the masturbation for us.
Yeah.
Fuck,
The
that was great.
Mental masturbation.
Sure. That was a good circle jerk we had.
No, very productive though. I agree with circle jerk.
Lots
That's
of
the one.
lots of what do you call it? Was produced in the circle jerk.
Fluids.
No. I'm trying to make it more what do you call it? Victorian or some shit like that. Something more fancy. Creation.
Some thought ejaculate.
Spritzen.
There, spritzen.
Spritzen.
Spunken.
Schnell.
Spunken.
I know all of my German from porn.
Spunken.
It means fast. That's what I've learned.
Good times, buddy.
Alright, see you guys.
Yeah.
Oh, this is good.
Yep. Well, it's darkening. The darkening is happening already. Look at that sun coming down.
Arctic.
We got about another half hour, let's say, to
Shoot the shit.
shoot the shit.
Well, I don't feel like I want to take over, but I feel like I will. But
What if I take over right now?
my suggestion?
you.
My suggestion.
I'll write it down.
Is about
You may supply your suggestion.
what do you call it? The righteous indignation shit. The moral outrage.
Yeah, that's already been a topic. So,
Yeah, I mean, we
so
didn't beat it
hold on
enough.
a sec here. Let's take a moment. Breathe in, breathe out. We got half hour. Doesn't matter.
Oh.
We don't have to panic
Oh.
towards some kind of expression or something in particular.
No, I think we left out one thing that we wanted to say, or I wanted to say.
Well, we didn't get to actually any of this, what we laid out. But I think it was amazing with Dustin. We got into a lot of like the
Oh, yeah,
animal
that-
human stuff, the holonic model.
I mean, isn't that what always
Like-
happens with Dustin, though?
But that's
we
he's
go
like
off
our
course.
guinea pig.
So I only wanted to say one phrase. When it
So
comes
I'm
when it
completely
comes
happy with that.
when it comes to moral
Outrage.
outrage.
Yeah, which was
it's the
that's one of
stepping
the
into
topics.
it's stepping into the two shit piles, and avoiding to do that. To like not be on the side of the accuser
And
and
this-
not to be on the side of the accused.
This comes
but
back
but
to feedback. This
but-
is a dream.
But to be
Politics is a dream.
But to be cognitive of the entire context, right?
Politics is a dream.
Well-
The reality tunnels that peddled by over various media.
Hyper narratives.
Right. The various hyper narratives.
We've got a language for this, yes.
Yeah, hyper narratives peddled into your dream.
Yeah. So we could use the big circle diagram for to talk about that, or we could use the ontological matrix diagram to talk about that. Both are relevant from the perspective
Mhm.
of sound bites feeding the mythology.
The Matrix really brings it down to like a point of contact.
Yes.
That's what I like about that
Yes,
diagram.
yes. In fact, the Matrix makes it very, very, very cool.
Not that one, but there's
No,
another
I know
one.
that. I know what you mean. What I mean is what
One
I'm
which we
trying.
don't have right now.
Right. But this is relevant, and what I'm trying to point at is that this happens in that. So it's really all about. It's all
Mhm.
relatable,
So
or related rather.
yeah, that's one like I really wanted today to kind of connect again those kind of like this types of charts. The guild structure, like this one, the archetypes, big one, and like really what the guild organization looks like at the office level. Offices and every guild has 12 offices or whatever it is, right?
Well,
It must.
hyperstitionally,
Um,
they can be occupied by one.
hyperstitionally, we say because it's like slots to be occupied, and guess what? If they don't
Roles
be,
to take on, yeah.
if they don't get taken care of, what happens?
Right.
Entropy takes right over.
Mhm.
That is what
Well-
it is. That's the proposition right there. If you take care of these offices, your guild may survive.
You don't get
so
to
to
get
speak.
away from entropy, but it becomes part of the articulation itself. Like you take it into account, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the other element of the guild is that it lives and dies, much like a creature. So, to the extent that entropy is relevant, it's just that it's mapped. It's addressed, and effectively speaking, when say a demand dissipates, right? The supply,
This is like
the supply
change.
needs, the
This
supply
screams
needs to also-
change to me. Entropy must take account of change. I don't know
Yeah,
if that is anywhere else, but
yeah, like the entire.
because whatever your map is, that map it sort of pseudo decays.
Yeah.
Its isomorphism decays. The map itself stays. That's whatever your media is, which containing the map. It could be your brain, could be a piece of paper, but the world around that map, the isomorphism with the world around that map decays. Is what decays. The world is fine.
Yeah.
The isomorphism is decaying.
Yeah, so I only mention that because I don't want to have exclude the notion that guilds themselves aren't meant to form a static structure, right? So, yeah, entropy is part of the question during the functioning of the guild, but it's not a question that is to be overcome so that the existence of that guild is established into some kind of arbitrary eternity. The idea is to accommodate entropy, and when
as an ever flexing, ever flowing life form,
as a source of information, essentially.
the map must be alive. The map
Yeah.
must change somehow.
It's an input. And when the entropic context dictates that the existence of said guild is no longer relevant, that guild has no that guild has no meaning to the guild, if you will, the full institution, if you will. The institution carries on.
So
of
it's
course.
interesting that at a number of archetypes up, we have death, which is what I'm feeling right now
Mhm.
from what you're saying, like
Yep.
life and death, things created. We're talking entropy, which it's kind of like
A faction of factor of time, essentially. Property of time.
yeah, very interesting. Obviously, the reflections you always see between different triplets here. The recurring theme,
Mhm.
archetype model guild.
Yeah, but that's not the most relevant bit. But it is interesting. for sure.
Yeah, just to speak about how we managed to transition from like entropy, like at the bottom, near the bottom, after uncertainty, into talking about death. That's what it felt like. How
Right.
organization guilds come and go. Structures need to have a timeline, a time frame. That's the execution of that life. The life being the creation of the seed of what that thing is, and then it's the
How about-
unfolding of its existence is its death.
How about not so much a timeline, but a context? So, like, where the context for that entity, for the guild to exist, is there, it exists. Where the context is not there, the guild is not there. So basically, like, the environment changes, and the concept and the makeup of the environment, by definition, is also changes, right? And that change in the makeup
we
of that environment
shouldn't make
is
the mistake
reflected
to
by the
look
guild.
at life and death as tracking an entity. An
Right,
object
right. That's
through
all I'm
space.
saying.
I got
Because
you.
because then the notion of rebirth, if you will, also starts to make more sense in this scheme, because once the context returns, there's nothing to say that the same entity can
Right,
exist.
and this is like part, I think, again, of holonic organization, holonic stacking, whatever you want to call it. That things can emerge at a higher layer, but as soon as the conditions aren't there, that thing is not emerging. Whatever it is that the conditions are below, if even one is not there, it's not the thing, technically.
Yeah, and I think the only thing we're doing that's quote unquote different than the system in this thought process is once the condition disappears, there's no artificial reconstruction of the condition to perpetuate something that doesn't necessarily need to be there anymore. Which is what the reverse of what the system is doing, the market system is doing at the moment.
Yeah, this reminds me of course, the ego machine with its
Profits
market.
are protected, basically.
The ego machine with its market, and the medicine machine, which is in whose entire point is to allow the ego machine to die, to disintegrate. That's what
it
medicine
doesn't die.
You know what I'm saying, though? Medicine applied to ego is to allow that ego to, what are we saying, dissipate, exhaust.
So ego is a phenomena, right? It doesn't dissipate, but when the conditions for the phenomena are not
Again,
met,
we're talking the same thing, exactly.
It doesn't come up.
It's not that, a magical thing happens. It's that the conditions are no longer there, so the
Right.
thing isn't actually there anymore.
But the kicker on that one
Medicine
is that the
does
conditions,
that.
But if the conditions come back, ego arises again.
Again.
So
Yes.
So there's
Which
no,
is fine.
So there's no killing it. There's no
That's fine.
dissipating.
Okay.
There's-
Yeah.
That's all
I
I'm trying
see.
to get at.
I see.
There's a
That's a good
there's a
point.
fine line there.
But what we
There's
have,
not an entity.
what we have is a medicine that's somehow facilitating these ego structures to decompose. Decompose is a nice organic word, isn't it?
So one metaphor I used once on Reddit, just trying
And
to
this is a
talk
big thing
about
for
it,
organization, by the way, too, because
is
ego structure, corpse need to decompose.
what you do with ego is not you don't decompose it, you expose it. So what you get the ego to do is to justify
Expose it?
Yes.
Yes, and if it shouldn't be there anymore, then it, boom,
So the
gone.
process looks a lot
And
like.
how do you justify it? It's demand. Ego,
Hold on,
corp, is supplying demand. If that demand is no longer there, why are you there? Boom,
There's that.
decomposed.
There's that.
Back to the people. This is what medicine does.
What I'm trying to point at is that when you turn the ego onto itself,
Medicine machine.
which is something it doesn't like to do,
Nope.
you ask it to basically start to justify itself, which means it'll start to
An
expand.
audit?
It'll start to expand on its definition of what it is, and then you ask it to justify all of those expansions, and it'll expand again. And you just
Okay.
ask it to justify all of those expansions, and on ad infinitum, until you get an entire ball of absolute fucking nothing. And it's at that point where ego is revealed to be what it is. In its full-blown exposition, it becomes a completely
So,
meaningless
are you saying this is
aspect
how
of experience.
companies have to be audited?
Have to be audited.
I know I chose the wording.
I'm confused by your question.
I just used standard layman terminology wording.
If you were to self-audit, yes. The problem is that if you're with phrasing that way is that the point of ego becomes the company itself, and the same thing will blow up, but the company will disappear, and the workers will be left with no mechanism of feeding themselves. So this isn't productive line of thinking. If you're trying to apply it to a capitalistic setting, it's just going to flop.
Right, I'm not sure I get that. Like, I was just thinking about like audit.
It ceases to be a company
Like,
by
how do we do this? So we're talking about demand and supply economics, as we call it.
Maybe I misunderstood your question.
Importance
by the way.
on demand and supply. And we're talking about corporations coming into existence because there's
As a response to demand.
Response to demand. There is a supply coming up. Where does it come out of? This is where we're talking about where it returns to.
Well, it's demanded.
Some sort of.
Well, it's demanded. So
Like,
the supply comes from being supplied.
What we know is that demands come and go. You need something very bad one moment, next you don't.
Right, you're hungry one moment. After you eat, you're not hungry. It's that basic.
Right. And so, like, I'm just trying to, like, work the economics of this, but the only reason you would have, like, this demand and supply system is if within your locality you have supply ability. In other words, you're decentralizing in certain capacities, right? Otherwise, you don't have that control to just dissolve and
I'm not
create
even sure
corporations.
centralization or decentralization is at the heart of the fundamental problem because
Think about a 2-week
because you
global
can have stuff centralized
food
and it's
supply.
working, and you can have stuff decentralized and it's working. I think that itself is a matter of demand and supply, because at some point the demand is to be hierarchical.
I agree with a complete mix.
What I'm
I
saying
agree
is
with a
that
total mix.
yeah,
gotta be a transition.
not just a mix.
It's not you don't just have an ideological, oh, this is the way it should be.
Not just a mix, but a flux.
I think,
A shift. Like sometimes the same things are centralized, and at the same times they can be viewed from a different orthogonal perspective as decentralized at the same time. And whatever the moment calls for is the appropriate context to use for utility of whatever is there.
Of course, assuming everybody fully educated, then guess what that would look like? Localism.
Well, the fully educated portion relies on the emergence of the guild to be already marred in said education. There's no guild without education.
Chicken and egg, of course.
So you have to run with some assumptions with that regard.
As always, and that's why things always seem like kind of so far off, but I don't really believe so, because I think crisis will often leads people to search for extreme measures, right?
Actually, this is where moral outrage becomes really relevant. Because crises are the best tool for perpetuating a moral
Something happened, it's a big shock,
outrage.
and the narrative is it's because of this group of people.
Right.
That's
So-
why
so-
this shock is happening. That's how you move
So
populations.
crises are actually not the best playing field.
No, but
because nobody's paying attention.
dude,
This is
there's no choice.
it
I,
speaks.
I think there's no choice because there are crises. They are happening in cascading effect, and there's no choice.
It speaks to my previous point that stuff like this and stuff like Buddhism and any of these kinds of capacities to really give it a go
Hold on.
is in the middle class.
Hold
The
on.
one space that feels that is wrong but has enough free time to
Agreed.
take the
Yeah,
time to
I
do
like
it.
that point.
So
Forgot what my point was. So
there's that constraint to work from. In that what we're trying to achieve actually only becomes tangible where you're not in a situation where you're overworked, right? And it's a very very slim.
this is like the classic Buddha story too.
That's not an accident. Like the entire Buddhist scripture, if you will, paints a very, very specific picture, right? It's a poem, if you will. And that poem is literally starts off with a framework of what the experience of the detached middle class individual, detached from nature, is like, where their needs are their basic needs are overmet to the point of where they are too free to engage in whatever the fuck they want.
Well, so what we're talking about, I think, right now is what is the most likely path of effectiveness of some kind of cultural transformation. And it's people who have the ability even to think about on this level. And it's very few and far between. So what does that mean? This is the guild networking thing that I brought up before, which is there are few and far between. We all need to get together as masters.
I really struggle
Right.
with the notion of quote unquote social transformation. It also comes from the same Buddhist.
Well, it's like whatever you want to call it. I'm not. You know me. I'm not latching on something.
So no. So
some term.
I just want to give you where that thought even came from.
So what does the social
so the
transformation
Buddha-
look like?
So the Buddha, right? Like
We're talking about the guild.
So the Buddha.
What did the Buddha do?
So the Buddha had his moment, right? Like that quote unquote enlightenment
And he
moment.
told everybody about it.
False. The very first instinct in the story is to
Not tell everybody
not
about
tell
it.
anyone anything
eventually
because it's so subtle that no matter how you twist it, it's not going to come across correctly.
Correct.
So this is not a meaningless point in the scripture. Like, it speaks to something. It's painting a picture here, right? We're talking about a poem again. So what picture is this painting? It's painting the picture that this is not the kind of
Something
conversation
inexpressible.
that's going to happen around the table.
And we were talking about empathy before too. That connects right in. What is empathy? Knowledge of this inner world to be expressed, which can't be expressed.
So the story continues,
That's
right?
the membership in the guild.
The story continues with one of the deities appearing to the Buddha and pleading with him to actually reveal what he had realized, not because everybody will get it, but because there is the potential for somebody to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so right
Somebody
off the
might
bat,
understand because I
So-
myself have had this experience, which I can't express. Therefore, maybe somebody else might listen to this expression and match it to their experience.
So, yeah, but the most significant part of this particular story is that right off the bat, you get a sense of this isn't going to be a usual conversation. In fact, this is going to be a conversation which goes nowhere in 99.99999% of the time. That's not what makes.
Of course.
That's not
I've got a cool idea.
the convincing power of what you're saying. Isn't the point. The essence of what is being said is that much more important.
How do you like that?
Love it.
Oh yeah.
So yeah. So this is where I struggle with the idea of social change, in that never has this kind of teaching had been positioned to
From
To-
this
to-
kind of top-down feeling, I guess you're saying the social
to
to target
express
the social.
exactly to express this need for social rearrangement. It only ever
But
locks
can we
itself
not
down on
can
the
we not
neurological
navigate
system.
that?
We can, but by tackling the social, by tackling the neurological aspect,
Of course.
fixing that, which
But, like,
fixes that.
Like mythologically and hyperstition and all this, you need to get people to understand what's happening with this. That way they
Close.
get it.
Close, because and the reason is,
Come on.
the reason is that what makes it close, but not really, is that it's all emergence, and we're discussing a way of making something emerge and making something not emerge, and those things don't have causal chains to deal with in the quantitative sense. So all of that emergence and
Sounds like a religion.
unemergence has to do more with selective emergence to begin with, and so you can't. Again,
So-
the line of thinking that you're talking about is closer to attacking a group of people than it is to fixing a problem. The problem, rather. Right? Because because the way you described it is like, if you just tackle this idea, remove thinkers of those ideas, effectively out of the operating system, then those won't emerge.
What I tried to do
But
was
what you need to do is
was-
change the thinkers themselves.
I tried to make an expression at the social layer of an imperative at the social, where I know it, obviously the model at the neurological. This is where we can make
Then
a
I
change.
Then I guess I got tripped up by its authoritativeness, because
Yeah, that's what you would do. What anybody would see. They would see it as some kind of shit like that. I just tried to point to the fact of a calling, that an expression out to the social happens.
and it speaks to
It happens.
and it speaks to our differences in terms of how to structure this in what emerges, or how to tackle
Yeah. How to
what
express.
is emerging, because you almost religiously, this is not a bad thing, but you're
religiously.
almost religiously are tackling the social aspect only, and I keep driving at the underlying neurological
Right.
stuff,
Right. So that the
Because-
structure is sound.
because I want to try to emerge what you're talking about out of it, right? Like,
Mhm.
if you fix these things here, by the way, those are the only things you can fix, right? That's the responsibility part. This emerges what you're talking
Right.
about,
And
but
it's like-
because it's fuzzy and emergent and all of those things, you're asking me like, oh, okay, so what's the protocol? And I'm like, well, it's this there, it's this, it's there, it's
course.
that here, and it's going to be something like this over here.
And it's
And
like
we don't know.
it's like more than even ingress.
And over here it will not work.
More than ingress, the context of the person, of the human themselves, and their history and all
And the
this.
context of the garden itself, and the context of the flower itself, right? Like, where are you growing a flower that's meant for tropical areas in soil that is in Canada? What's the protocol for that?
Mhm.
Right? Like, should that be part of generic gardening protocols? or is it something that is specialized and all to itself? This is the problem where you get
specialized.
and this is the problem where you get into when you try to make a concrete guild. It needs to shift. It needs to. It's this there. It's this that. You know what? Those things can coexist and live and die all at once.
So, like, I think guilds tend to be made up of more fundamental things, like just basic gardening ideas. But in the significant is where it's more shifting. Like, oh, what does our community focus on more? Like edible foods or like plant flowers that look good.
Yep.
And that's where in the significant it can completely shift. But there's knowledge that's fundamental to all that, which never basically changes. You're still having a greenhouse. You're still having dirt and all this.
So maybe it makes more sense to have one concrete guild for all things fundamental to gardening, and then offshoot guilds that are specific to this, to that, to the other thing. And they all.
This is a really tough problem for a guild.
And then you don't need to have and then you don't need to have anything actual fundamental in the middle of it. It could just be an emergent element of all the specifics.
Your problem right away is going to be land. Let's say in the case of gardening, you need land. That land has its own context. So what is your fundamental guild for this garden?
So there's a trade
is going to be like
involved.
Yeah.
Well, there would be.
You have to kind of negotiate.
Absolutely. Anything to do monetarily wise is trade guild.
Right. But so like let's say as a guild, let's call a master or whatever, creating a guild of people, or a place for people to connect over, let's say the garden, right? You would have to kind of have a holistic view of where can this go? Can it feed people? Can it make pretty flowers? Can it do both? What are the things that it can do? And so
if it does one, can it do the other at the same time?
So I think that you need as a master in this case, you need a vision of where this can go, and then you need to plant that guild as deep as it can go in its most common denominator.
So this is the utility.
The common denominator. Do you see that this is a?
So the utility of the guild is essentially such that you take a dream.
This is the manifold. This is presence.
You take a dream and you plant the narrative into it and all of those things.
The Fourier transform.
And the difference between it and anything else is that it comes with the knowledge of this is the moment, this is the guild being planted down, this is the moment in which the dream is expanding to this is the moment that the dream is expanding to that, and so on and so forth. Essentially, it's a... Sorry.
Are you talking about planning, like project management?
Hyperstition.
Hyperstition.
That's the word I skipped over, actually.
Like it sounded like you're planning out a map of things in the future or something.
Well, you can always have a map of the future, but there's that pesky little meta schedule problem. So the future is planned based on current moment.
Right, the heart of the guild.
Which
finally
which gives us what
to
we
the heart
do
of the guild
next, but which changes what
the meta schedule
and so on and goes.
Right. And so it's very difficult, but because when you create a guild, a land-based guild, you want that to be an anchor for any change significantly that can happen to it. That
and
it's somehow it's like relevant to the core of people who make it up.
So can I
no
just
matter what
comment
change
on the anchor?
happens, it's always
so you're talking about permanence of some sort, but
no,
what we're talking, I just want to clarify
an ideal of permanence, a want of
one that still acknowledges the whole life and death cycle, which means that that planting, that permanent planting of something, is into a context. It's not into the matrix itself. It's not into the ontology itself, but into a context that is popping up in the ontology, and without that context, it isn't planted to begin with, and so its reemergence is synonymous with the reemergence of the context rather than some kind of idealized permanence expressed on an accounting book.
Mm-hmm.
The hunting party only exists when there's a hunt. It usually consists of the same people, but sometimes it does not.
That's
And over time, it's
That's
going to
fine.
be made out of completely different people.
and always it was
And
it
it's
was
not going to-
based in getting food.
And also, it's not going to exist at all whenever
So
nobody's
like
hunting.
So like that's the context is like people are hungry, they want food. So that's kind of like that's what I mean to point at when you're creating a guild. Try to create the most fundamental context you can. Like we're hungry. This is our demand. This is our demand. If that demand ever goes away, then goodbye to your guild, and that's the way it should be, right? But
And as you elaborate on the context, you elaborate on the guild. So, we're hungry. Are we going to forage? Are we going to plow the field? Not plow the fields.
plant seeds,
When you're
cultivate.
when you're hungry, you don't want to plant. You wanna dig.
No.
You wanna dig the seeds.
Harvest.
Yeah, harvest. That's the one. Are we gonna you know what I mean? Are we gonna go on a hunt?
Take the
So-
seeds out of the ground that you
so-
planted already
so
because
I'm-
now you're hungry.
So I'm agreeing with you, and it's painting this picture right there of what you're talking about. And so you would
Yeah, the
form a
classic.
fundamental kind of guild, and you would find a fundamental guild out of the hunger. Everybody's a member of the hunger guild, if you will.
Sure, right. That's what I mean. Like if you're establishing a guild, its context is that demand.
And then you have the specific role-oriented jobs, which form their own guild out of that. And I think the biggest struggle in formulating concrete protocols for something like that is that it's such a shifting ground that
It's always changing. Yeah.
that it might not be the it might not be the tackling point for protocols.
I bet the hardest part is starting, and we almost never see the actual
And
operation.
now I'm fucking thinking this
Like,
leads me to believe
the
that
guild
the
just-
protocols that we really, really, really should start with are
we
that
don't,
of the
we don't
dashboard.
see. Sure.
Because if you break down everything, every guild, every single interaction of guild to its base components, it's always going to be conversation leading into schemas, leading into
Right.
all of that
And now
stuff.
we have to step away from the
So-
idealistic apprehension of thinking that everything is a system in a way like, oh, those are the gardeners, they're doing gardens, blah, blah, blah. You have to step away from that kind of systemic, perfective, mathematical, linear apprehension and see that this is the protocol record is from living life, from context, from the actual people
So-
in context, creating the story of their space through conversation, and that's where things get lifted.
I think we
out
can
of-
agree on protocols right now if you agree with my where I've been stalling.
Stalling?
You go social, I go neural. The concrete doesn't come back out. It's the same significant and fundamental problem. You can go down, but coming back up is fucking treacherous.
Yeah. So
Um,
the bridge, yeah. I get
so-
it, and I agree. Like I usually tend, I tend to want to communicate
Protocol 1.
what people can understand at mass.
Protocol 1, speech. Conversation.
Oh, speech. Oh no, you triggered me already.
Proto-
You mean free speech?
Just speech. Talk.
Not
Conversational.
free?
Shut up.
Because I'm triggered now.
Shut up.
Okay, speech.
Protocol 2, broadcast. The
Because
same,
only-
same as the modes of operation.
Only certain
basically.
speeches you would want to put on the radio,
Basically, yeah.
let's say.
But broadcast differs from speech in that speech is
Conversational.
Bi-directional.
Implied, at least.
Broadcast is like a vomit of information.
And things really collide, don't they? Because some people can just be not even...
Broadcasts are done by speech.
Okay,
so it's
what
okay.
we're saying is that speech is more fundamental than the broadcast, which is more significant. Yes, you can
need speech to broadcast.
Yes, you can have people who talk in broadcasts who don't even converse with those around them. We are saying no, speech is more fundamental than such a broadcast.
Yeah. In fact, we can turn this entirely around and say this. Broadcast is a product of speech. You don't get a broadcast unless you're speaking to begin with.
This is, again, the holonic stacking and all this. It's a simple model, isn't it? Is it like, do we need to like have a...
If this is complicated,
this is the model? Like, there must... Why don't...
This cannot be complicated for, like, say, the most average type of human being there is on this planet. This isn't that kind of a theory. These are experiential things everybody goes through, so therefore relatable.
It's got to be the baseline, lowest common denominator. Is that as far as cognitively?
Yeah, but that's selling us just quite short, isn't it?
Like, I mean, in this way of fundamentally to significantly stacking maps of experience, right?
Well,
we're from the bottom to the top.
I don't know if that's the correct way to posit this, because when it comes down to the layers, you also have to account for the fact that there's a strange loop happening. And
that's the top. That's what you find at the top. The bottom,
the
bottom I mean most connected to the senses.
When you call it a strange loop, the problem is that it's not the top, it's the fact that the top is the bottom. Right? So the easiest way to understand what I mean by that is that molecules, atoms, and all of that kind of stuff exists in our equations.
Right.
And yet, it's also the very makeup that underlies everything that works from below it. Mm-hmm. But the formulation of what they are doesn't exist in any of those spaces. It's a reflection.
I think any atheist would agree with at least the fact that molecules in our model come up to tissues and organs. Anybody.
Ask physicists what they think particles are, and they will tell you. They're just equations on a fucking... There are theoretical things. There's no such thing as a particle.
Yeah, but
they're
that
equations
doesn't
that reflect
mean...
things that are particle-like, that work. But particles are not the equations.
And why do they work? Of course, you're pointing at the disconnect. I'm pointing at why do they work.
And physicists say this.
They work.
They say this, though.
They say that the equations work.
They say that the equations work.
That's
but the good physicists also point out that particles are theoretical entities. By theoretical means they're used in a model that reflects reality, and that model says something about reality, but it isn't the reality.
This is not scientism.
That would not be, no. That would be a recognition of what you're looking at.
So you're saying that you're calling this a true scientist?
Sure. Like, true scientist. Yeah.
You wouldn't put that label, but I made it so tantalizing.
Well, yeah, but I just equate it with like true Christian or all of that shit.
But like, there's scientist, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But then there's what is the scientific method? What is this really about? It's about uncertainty. You must acknowledge the uncertainty.
I'm only talking about physics is because it's the easiest.
The model isn't reality.
It's not
equal to
point to filter out, to say that, hey, whatever we say about particles that really make up our atoms and molecules and all of that stuff, that thing that we know is real, basically. That are building blocks. exist in equations in theory land. Their entire existence is bound up in these equations because what they really are aren't those equations, and we don't know what they really are.
Damn.
We just have enough information about it to say some things about them.
I guess pretty sure we're on our way due to the time. But what a day.
Sorry I
think we got
hammered
to a
on
lot.
this, but I really want to make the point that when you get to a top layer within this thought process, you're not going above the other layers.
Right. This is the ego stacking. This is the thing that looks weird when you have holons suddenly, and then suddenly ego.
That's what appears to ego.
Suddenly ego.
That's what appears to ego.
Instead of what would be the holon mirage of pointing down towards the bottom once again.
Yeah.
That's what a holon would look like instead of an ego operating in society.
Another way to put it is that the most sophisticated expositions about reality don't exist in that reality. They exist in the thoughts of people discussing said reality.
This is true science to understand that we're dealing with models, and models change and adapt. And you can't use them as authoritative sources unless you're involved in the experiment itself.
There is
that
something
would be
to
the
be
only
said,
reason for it.
There is something to be said for authoritativeness, simply for the fact that there are physical mechanisms and all of that kind of stuff that does obey specific rules. For example, without any kind of an authoritative understanding at all, something like martial arts could not exist. Because
Yeah.
the reasoning is very simple. I know you would. The reasoning is very simple. The body has specific limitations. It can only move in specific ways,
And
and
so
it can only
you
be
make certain
disabled
patterns
in specific ways.
It's almost like an alphabet,
So
an
there
alphabet
is.
of body movements.
Exactly.
Your
So
pencil can only move this many ways to make this many shapes.
for this amount of time.
And these are recognizable. In other words, these ones cause
And
points.
time, like-
These ones cause advantage to yourself.
Have you ever noticed, like in the worst martial arts demonstrations, you have one person that has
How important timing is?
you have one person that has 10 moves in the same span of time that the other person has for one move. And of course, the person with the 10 moves is going to demonstrate all of the cool stuff they can do in that time.
Like the teacher looking good?
Yeah.
Yes.
So if you take that, if you
I
actually
was thinking
step
about
this up
chess
into
too at
real
the time.
time,
Do you ever play chess?
yeah.
We should let's do
So-
next stream. We'll do a chess game.
So what's so funny about that scene is that if you were to speed it up to real time, every single one of those quote-unquote masters, if you will get punched right the fuck out.
Yeah, just
like
destroyed.
within the split second
Classic.
that they would be performing their
No, I've
10,
seen
15
videos. It's victim marionettes.
It's disturbing, but
the
that's
Steven Seagal syndrome.
But that's a great representation of the problem. Where representation does not equal reality. But the other thing about that is that martial arts wouldn't work if things were not mechanical, for example, either. So the reason that those masters fail, for example, because they fail the mechanics of it. They're in La La Land, imagining all of these fucking moves that they could potentially do if they were
From their own mind.
yeah,
kind of.
if they were
If I was me, I
if they were
would
the
maybe do
Flash.
this move or that
if
move.
they were the Flash, basically.
Yeah.
So, it's a kind of it's a double-edged sword, if you will. Yeah, there is freedom in, say, you can disconnect from reality to some extent, but the mechanics of reality do, in fact, need to play
Right.
a role.
And I think there is a layer going on here where no matter what, we are creating this alternate reality dream in our head. Divorcedness, sort of, from
You know,
what's going on.
do you remember the car diagram?
And the challenge is to undivorce that, to the manifold between the neural OS and the outside, the social, if you will, through downwards, going up through the downward.
So you know what's interesting about that diagram, though?
Which one?
The car diagram. You go down the layers, and you go up the layers.
Yeah.
We talk about it all the time. But there's that nagging little mediation agent sitting between those two things.
Telling lies?
No. No. Translating. Just translating. So it's a dumb agent. It's not a. It's not serving
Right.
its own purposes like all agents.
It's the same as the interpretation
It's
itself.
like you don't have a choice of how to interpret English.
It's just interpretation.
You know how you don't have a choice in interpreting what
Yeah, I
how-
get it.
what
I get it.
English
That's what I was
is
saying.
saying to you.
Anytime you pull up the stack, you're recognizing.
So there's that pesky intermediary agent, and I mentioned it because what you were saying is like there's like a non-choice part to it. That's what it's talking about right there. That non-choice part of the expressions that you're hearing. You don't have a choice as to what you're
which
hearing.
that's kind of interesting how that's how it comes to you as a non-choice, as a fact.
Mhm.
But meanwhile, to recognize that there's interpretation going on, this is
we gotta go.
the realm of the sentient machine.
Be right back.
Yep. And with that, we're out.